Okay, fine. So you all see the, I imagine, the big course, Smachal Rabbonis, Selchas Bosor B'Chalev. So we're going into the second half now. This is Shiur number 9, and we're doing the next two sifim in Siman Tzadik Beis, Sif Gimel and Dalet. Last week we did Aleph Beis, and today we're doing Gimel Dalet. And we touched a bit last week on the Inyan of Chaticha Nas and Nevela, otherwise known as Hanan. And that's going to be today's entire shiur. And this is a very, very fundamental inyan. It's going to carry, it goes throughout Shulchan Aruch, especially in Hilchos Tarubas, later on in Bosor B'Chalev. It's going to keep coming up again and again, the inyan of Chaticha Nas and Nevela. And it's very good to chazir the shiur. Going to need it again when it comes to Tarubas. It's always coming back over here to these sifim. So let's get to work. And I thought it would be advisable to do a short chazara of the main dinim that we learned last week, at least at the Lamaisa. We spoke first, Sif Aleph, about Bosor falling into Chalav. So when Bosor falls into Chalav, what happens right away is that the tam goes from one to another, and therefore there's always going to be a prohibition on the piece of meat that fell into the milk. As far as the milk is concerned, we want to know if there's shishim or there's not shishim. When I talk about milk falling into the meat, so then we look and see the different possibilities. Are the pieces of meat all submerged, and therefore when it falls in, it's basically falling into the liquid, it's falling into the soup? Or are the pieces chutz l'reitev, like you see, there's a piece in there's three different layers of pieces. The bottom ones are in the liquid, the middle ones are half in, half out, and the top ones are sitting on the middle ones, and therefore they're completely chutz l'reitev. And then we have the din of in between. What's with the in between pieces? The ones that are half submerged. So basically, you learn first what's the din of when it falls into the soup, or it falls into the pieces that are in the soup, and it gets evenly distributed. So then it's clear that it's batal b'shishim. What happens when it falls, the middle case, when it falls on the piece, when it's outside the reitev? So then it's clear that you need shishim in that piece against the milk that fell into it. And the Shach says we answer whatever it's touching, kadei natila, but whether we need to be mashayir against the rest of the pot or not, depends what happens. Does it fall in later or not? And then we mentioned the din of chaticha nas and nevela, that once that piece, when the drop, let's say you have an ounce of milk fell into the soup in the right-hand case, so then you need 60 ounces in the soup with everything that's in the soup in order to nullify it. When it falls on the piece itself, which is not in the liquid, which is the middle case, so if it's an ounce of milk, you need a piece of meat that's 60 ounces of volume. Talking about fluid ounces here, we're mainly talking about volume, not weight, which is still a big piece of meat. Very big piece. And then if that piece, so then if we don't have shishim against that 1 ounce of milk that fell in, so then if that falls in, we don't need, it's not enough to have 60 ounces in the rest of the soup, because now you don't need to nullify just the milk. Now it's chaticha atzma nas and avela. Excuse me, I just have to shut off something here so it doesn't keep bleeping throughout the whole shiur. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's just go back to here. So then you're going to need shishim against the entire piece, because the chaticha nas and nevela, and that there's no disagreement about. We're going to have a disagreement by Shari Surim, but Bosor B'Chalev, everybody holds chaticha atzma nas and nevela, and therefore it became one big piece of iser. And let's say the piece of meat was 8 ounces and 1 ounce fell in, so you're going to have to be mavatal the 9 ounces. You're going to need 9 times 60 in order to be mavatal. So the shaila is, when it's half and half, do we judge that piece like it's in the marok, and that's what the re holds, or we judge this piece like it's outside the marek, which is what Rashi holds, basically. So we'll see here that, as we mentioned before, that each one has a kul and a chumras. That according to the Ri, it's as if the piece that's the piece that's half in. I hope I didn't say it backwards. That the Ri holds that it's as if it fell into the marek itself, whereas Rashi holds it just fell into the chaticha. So Rashi holds that a piece that's half in and half out, we look at the part that's out. It's like it's out, and the Ri look at it as if it's in. And that's the machlekes between the Rashi and the Ri. And each one has a kul and a chumra, as we mentioned. According to the Ri, on the one hand, when that ounce of milk falls in, to be mavatlid, you don't need to have shishim in the piece. You can be mashayir against that piece together with all the other pieces in this big pot over here. The whole thing can be mavatlid b'shishim. On the other hand, if you don't have shishim, then it'll answer the whole pot. That's the chumra of the Ri. Mashenke Rashi holds you need shishim in the piece. But at least according to the Rashba, it doesn't spread to the rest of the kedera. It stops there. So that's a kul in the Rashi. The chumra is you need shishim against the piece. But as long as it doesn't fall in, according to the Rashba, it doesn't spread further. Because the Ran holds it does spread further. And basically, the Mechaber doesn't really say what he holds. He just quotes Lashon Rambam, and just like we have a machlekes, whether the Rambam is explaining like the Riyah Rashi, we have the same machlekes and Mechaber. So the Shach paskins that the Mechaber is saying like the Ri, and that's the way the Shach himself paskins. And the Taz holds that the Mechaber is holding according to Rashi. And as the Ran explains, it goes to all the Chumras, and that's what we have over here. The milk fell inside. So what does the Shulchan Aruch hold? The Rashach holds, he holds like the Ri, and the Taz holds, he holds like the Rashi. And the way the Ran explains, and that's where the Shach paskins, that's the way the Taz paskins. What does the Ramah hold? So Ramah holds interesting hachra in the middle. So on the one hand, we look and see whether you have shishim in the whole tafshil, which sounds like the Ri. And if you would have shishim in the whole tafshil, since it went in evenly throughout the whole thing more or less, so therefore we'd say the chatich is also mutter. But the Ramah is machmer on the piece. He answers the piece. I answers the piece. He sounds like Rashi. But that's what the Ramah comes in between. What's the explanation of the Das Ramah's whole discussion, Shach and Taz, what does the Ramah really mean? So according to the Shach, he wasn't sure, Suffolk, whether it passed on Rashi or the Ri, or if he took the Chumrah of both. Not completely, but in general, he took one Chumrah from each. But the Taz said, no, he really holds like the Ri. And he has another Chumrah. Chumrah, whatever the explanation for his Chumrah is, he decided to answer the Chatich. Then we brought this case over here, the Aruch Lamaitz, according to the Tzemach Tzedek, that if it was Chutz L'Reitev, so then there's no Shaila, that there's no Machalekes about it. That the Chaticha, if you don't have Shishim, that's Aser, but the rest of it is Mutter. You have to take Kedei Natila. But if it falls a piece that's half in and half out, so Tzemach Tzedek and Piskei Dinim holds basically like the Ramah. If you don't have Shishim, if you don't have shishim, then the whole thing is aser. The chaticha is aser, and the whole tafshil is aser. If you do have shishim, then what's going to be? You can be matter the rest of the tafshil behefset merubah. Because according to the Taz would want to aser the entire tafshil. Because since the piece itself is nasa nevela, and then according to the Ran, the way the Taz paskins, it spreads out the rest of the tafshil. So therefore, it's not enough to have shishim against the milk. You're going to have shishim against the chatich. But perhaps in Maruba, even though the chatchili paskins like that, but perhaps in Maruba, he paskins, you can rely on the dasari and shach in order to be made. Okay, so that's a very brief review of what we had last week. I thought that would be useful. We're going to be building on those concepts, especially if Gimel comes by Hemshech to Sif base. It's sort of a continuation. So the very last Inyan we're going to probably not finished today. Maybe we will, but we'll see. Okay, so the main concepts that we're going to be discussing today is the inyan of chaticha nas and avela. It's upper right hand corner, you see. And the big shaila is, does it apply also b'shari surim? Does it apply only b'basar b'chalav? Or does it apply b'shari surim? It's related. We're going to be mentioning the chag of the inyan of efshel asachte, that it's a machlekes. Gemara and the Rishonim through the poskim, that once something absorbs the iser, can you ever get it out? So let's say you had a chaticha that absorbed the iser, and then you threw this chaticha into a soup, and then the whole thing got all mixed together. So we say when it comes to aserit that the thing gets mixed in through the whole soup. So do we say that eventually it all became squeezed out of it and got mixed in to the rest of it? And it's related to chaticha nas and avela. Whether they're exactly the same thing or not is a whole discussion. But also we want to know efshel asachte. Once it became aser, is it aser forever? The efshel asachte is still always aser, which is like chaticha nas and avela, because once it became aser once, then it becomes aser forever. And then when there's another discussion, does that apply only b'basar b'chalav, but does it also extend to shar isurim? I can mention just another two topics before we go further, just a review from things that we had before. That we had in Sim Pei Zayin, and we've mentioned sort of parenthetically along the way that often halacha differentiates between an iser machmas atzmei and an iser balua. So when you have an iser machmas atzmei, that would be, for example, a piece of nevela. The animal died, the animal wasn't shechted properly, and it's a nevela. It's aser. Aser minatei. And the thing itself is aser. But let's say you have a piece of kosher meat and it just absorbed some nevela. It absorbed some juice of the nevela, dripped into it, or some dam, some blood which is aser, or chaylev which is aser, some forbidden fat dripped into it. So then it could be, if there's no shishim to nullify it, then it's also aser. But that's an iser balua. It's not an iser machmas atzmi. And there are many dinim, many places where the Shulchan Aruch differentiates whether it's an iser machmas atzmi or it's an Isra Balua. In general, we say that Bosor b'chalav is considered an Isra Machmas Atzmei. As we see in the din, if you have a half a gazayas, a half zayas Bosor, a half a zayas chalav, you put them together, so then the person gets malchus cooking it, for eating it, because now it's a zayas, it became a new Isra. It's not like the Bosor absorbed chalav, it's an Isra Balua that absorbed the Isra. It's a new Isra called Bosor b'chalav. It's got a new name. It's got a new name. If we get to it today, we'll mention this whole idea of names. What's in a name? So it has halachic significance, the name also. So the Bosor b'chalav becomes, it's a new name, and in general, we consider it to be Isra Machmas Atzmi. If you remember when we were learning about the keva, about making cheese, the Shach over there said that even though we normally consider it to be a Isra Machmas Atzmi, it's not completely, not mamish the same. We mentioned that Shach at the end of Sim Pesach. Okay, so that's one thing I want to review. That it's going to come up today. And another thing, just a review that we discussed the last time about the Shita Rabbi Yehuda. And Rav was the greatest of the, he was the Nasi Shabbader after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. The Rabbi brings him down based on Ben Shabbat Bavel. Rav was the one that said, who was Mashiach Shabbader, is Rabbi Imichaya, Rabbi. So Rav was the Nasi Ader, and the Rav paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. So many places in the Gemara, even though we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, lagabe min b'minei, Rabbi Yehuda paskin min b'minei ain't a bottle. So when you have taste, and we say you need b'neis and tam or shishim, according to the Ramah, we don't rely on people tasting it today. It's not goy. But what if it's min b'minei? So minatei is bottle b'rei. But Rabbi Yehuda holds that no, it's not bottle at all. If it's min b'minei, if it's all the same thing. So although we don't paskin like that, in order to understand the Gemara from last week, in order to understand the Gemara this week, we also need to remember the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, that Rav goes in that path, and he paskins that min b'minei is not bottle. Okay, and we're going to see towards in the second half of the shiur the din of a davuk. What happens if if a Isser and Heter are stuck together? Let's say you have a piece of kosher meat, but it's from the hind quarter of the animal and has chaylev. In general, there's two types of fat. There's chaylev and the shuman. Shuman is kosher fat, and chaylev is forbidden fat. Chaylev is isakari, so is dam. In any case, let's say you have a piece of kosher meat, the animal was shafted, but it's still got forbidden fats attached to it. Now, what happens when that falls into something else? Do we look at that as being one piece, or just look at the chaylev as the isur, as the fact that it's attached to something else? Does that make a difference? We'll be discussing that in the Ramah Sif Dalet. And then we have at the end of that Ramah also the union of Trei Mashahu, that what happens if something becomes also b'mashahu and that mashahu falls into something else? Is that also b'mashahu? How long does this keep going? Ad Bosor. So the Gemara it's talking about only according to Rabbi Yehuda. Well, min b'mina is also b'mashahu, and we don't pass them like that. But for us, it's a nafkamina l'gab chametz. There are other inyanim that are also b'mashahu. I might as well say, just so we'll get all the hakdamas out of the way. You have Nilchas Taruvas. You have a whole list of things that, although generally we say that the Isurim are Batul B'Shishim, you have a list of things that are not Batul B'Shishim. You have we know Dovish of a Minyan Le Batul. Many people know from Kota Sichas, like Abba Midbar, where the Irish accounted, you count something. You have a whole machlekes, which things is called Dovish of a Minyan, which things are not. Then we have a Chaticha Roy Leskabit. We mentioned right at the beginning of some Peizayin that if you have a piece that's fit to serve for guests, it's a very hush of a piece. That's also not bottle. There's no bittul b'shishim. There's a davar sheyesh l'matirin, something which will be, let's say, something was born an egg which is born on Yom Tov, so it's also now, but it'll become mutter if you wait till after Yom Tov. So there's also not bottle. A number of things which are not bottle. So we're going to have right in Sif Gimel then chatich haroli l'skabit. Okay, so that's all the hakdamas. And now let's jump into it. Any questions before we go further? Okay, Kigangan. Wasn't sure I had my speakers off. Anybody said anything? Did I miss anybody?
Hear you.
Okay, very good. Okay, so here's the Gemara. Gemara. This is the Chul and Daf Kuf. So there was a Mishnah, and earlier in the Perek Gedonoshim, and the Gemara is talking about the Mishnah. Dorish Rabbi Barachon. So if you have a piece of something which is prohibited and it fell into a pot, excuse me, a piece of nevela, a piece of non-kosher fish, it's going to prohibit the pot only after it's nascent tam. In how much? Bereitev, ubekipa, ubechatichas. Bereitev is the liquid, the kippah is the other things which are in the pot, the vegetables, and the pieces, the other pieces which are in the pot, the pieces of kosher meat, piece of kosher fish, whatever it happens to be. Now, the Rav heard this din from Rabbi Barchana, and he says, well, not necessarily is every case like that. So Uki Rabba Meireyole, Badorsh. So the Rav darshan, and he had an Ameir is like a matargum, somebody to say they did, and he told him what to say. And he says a very, very interesting statement. So let's say we have over there in the right-hand pot over there, you have a piece of kosher meat, which is the red one, and the piece which of nevela, which is the gray one. So he says as follows. Let's say you cook those two pieces in a pot. That once one piece gave taste into the other piece, each one gives the taste to the other one. But the one we're interested in, we're not going to eat the nevela anyway, right? So the nevela gave in taste to the kosher. So since it was nascent tam, chaticha atzman nasnus nevela. So that piece was nas nevela. And then it answers all the rest of the chatichas because they're the same min. Okay? So since we say min le bottle, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's the way you'd first want to learn this. So therefore, once the piece of nevela answered this piece, so it answers all the other chatichas. I mean, you got the nevela in the pot anyway. But let's say this piece of kosher meat fell into another pot. So now we're going to say mimma mine. Let's say you had a whole pot full of chatichas, and this piece of kosher meat over here on the right, it was beleya from this piece of nevela, and then it's going to answer all the rest of the pieces. Richtig? Okay. So let me just ask you a question. We have to think into this a little bit in order to properly understand what's going on over here, because this is going to be the key to understanding the machlekes machaber Ramah, which is machlekes Rabbi Yehud, the Rabbeinu Ephraim, the Rabbeinu Tam, about whether only Bosor b'chalav is in the chetich nas nevela or shari surim the chetich nas nevela. So we have to think into it a second. I know it's hard for us to relate to the opinion of Yehuda. We don't already mean minalei bottle. Why do we keep discussing it? Because that's going to be the key to understanding what's going on over here. Let me ask you a question. Let's say in the right hand pot, we had the nevela was less than shishim in comparison with the other piece. What would be with the dinner of the other piece? The kosher piece would be kosher or not? You had bittul b'shishim. You had bittul b'shishim of the nevela against the ksher. What do you say?
Yeah.
The halacha, yeah, we say it's yeah bottle. But according to Rav, what would Rav say? Rav hold the Rabbi Yehuda, the min b'minolei bottle, and the piece of nevela and the piece of ksher, both the same min. So let's say it's not going to be 160, it's going to be 100. What's Rav going to say?
Ain't a bottle.
Huh?
Ain't a bottle.
Ain't a bottle. Miva minale bottle. So you can answer the piece. Okay? But that's not what he said. What did the Amaida say? That's what we would expect Rav to say. But that's not what he told the Amaida to say. What did he dash? What's up with your nasan tam b'chaticha? What's mit the mal Rav comes along and it has to be nasan tam b'chaticha? It doesn't have to be nasan tam b'chaticha. Nasan tam means that you don't have shisha. We measure with shisha. Okay, l'chor according to Rav, who cares what's nasan tam? It's not nasan tam. It's also b'mashu. Min b'mine. Good question, huh? This is the question which have this long thesis that we're going to learn little pieces of soon. That we have two answers to that question, why it was written like that, and a big nafkamina ledina, which ends up being machlekes mechaber Ramah. Clear? The question's clear. Rav says chaticha nas and avela. Right? But when it's nice and tam, who cares about nice and tam? How does nice and tam get into this whole discussion? Mimma minolei bottle. Who cares about nice and tam? That's the question. Good. By the way, do we know anything about chetich nas and avela before? We ever had such a case before? You bet. We just had it in last week's Gemara. Tipas cholef. What happened to the tipas cholef? If it falls on the chaticha, which is chutz l'reitiv, what happens to the chaticha? So chaticha nas and avela. If it's nice and tam. Okay.
1 second. When it's not a chaticha, we do rely on tam bi'ikar adin. We only say nowadays we do bittul b'shishim. Why should it be any different by a chaticha?
Right now we're talking about mimba mine. We're talking about mimba mine. That's nice and tam. Okay, so there's two steps over here. Shlav rishon is like this. You have a chaticha iser. This is clear what Rav's talking about. We just don't know why. Why does Rav need it to be nice and tam over here? And how does it fit with the other Gemara? Any case, so Shlav, the first stage is that the nevelig is nice and tam b'chatichas heter. Okay, that's what happens first. Okay, it's nice and tam. We've got a nice yellow arrow to show it's nice and tam. That's the first Shlav. Now, you took it out, a piece of nevela. You don't want a piece of nevela in the pot. And now you put up a whole bunch of, you make a tafshil with the rest of the piece. And the second stage is the chaticha shenesra eiser shara tafshil. That it's going to answer everything else because it's nas and nevela. Two different steps over here, yeah? The shaila is, why? According to Rabbi Yehuda, it has to be nice and tam. Why does Rav require it has to be nice and tam? The nevela into the heter. That's the shaila. That's the big shaila that we're worried about over here. So basically, we're going to have two answers to the question. So now it's not clear. It's going to take a while to see how Rabbeinu Ephraim really answers this question. But the Tosfos goes into this whole question. Bottom line, what's going to come out of that discussion is we're going to have a machlekes Rabbeinu Ephraim and the Rabbeinu Tam. Let's learn Rabbeinu Tam first because it's easier to understand. That's Rabbeinu Tam on the left. He holds that the reason you did nice and tam because you wanted to be chaticha nas and nevela. In other words, if it was only an iser mashu, so this whole piece would be aser because mimba minolei batul. But what happens when you put it into another pot? And then you take that piece. Is that also going to be? We consider it to be completely aser, or it's only a mashu that's going to become batul in the pot? Then we're going to say, according to Rabbeinu Tam, in such a case, since it's not Bosor b'cholav, it's not that the whole piece became aser. It became aser because it absorbed a little bit of the nevela. Let's say it was batul b'shish. Yeah, let's say it was 1%. So it was 1% nevela. Okay, member minolei batul. But that doesn't mean it's going to be nasa nevela. The only time says Rabbeinu Tam, it's going to be nasa nevela if it's nice and tam. So when we have Bosor b'cholav, there's no restrictions. Bosor b'cholav, as once it became Bosor b'cholav, chaticha nasa nevela. Okay. When you have shari surim, not necessarily is chaticha nasa nevela. Only when it's nice and tam is chaticha nasa nevela. So Rabbeinu Tam holds that the inyan of chaticha nasa nevela applies to Bosor b'cholav, and it also applies to shari surim. And that's why Rav required it was nice and tam. Because if it wasn't nice and tam, it wouldn't be nasa nevela. And then it's going to answer not only the other chatichas, it's going to answer the whole pot, according to Rabbeinu Tam. But according to Rabbeinu Ephraim, each one has a little trouble with the Lashon HaGemara and other Gemaras, and I can't really go into it now. It's whether worthwhile going through the Tosfos, but we're just going to concentrate on the Shitas over here. Rabbeinu Ephraim holds that although it says over here chaticha nasa nevela, it doesn't mean mamash nasa nevela. It's only going to ask him mitzad min b'minei. Why? Because Rabbeinu Ephraim says there's no chaticha nasa nevela over shar isurim. So you see on the right, that's Rabbeinu Ephraim b'shar isurim chaticha ein nasa nevela. So everybody agrees it's nasa nevela, but if Rabbeinu, if everybody holds that Bosor b'cholav is the chaticha nasa nevela. Again, let's just chazer over. What's the difference whether something's nasa nevela or not? Okay, let's say you have a 6 ounces of meat and it absorbed. Somebody made a cheeseburger with 4 ounces of cheese. No? Now you got 10 ounces of Bosor b'cholav. This falls into another food that has 40, but it would need 60 times 4, 240 ounces of something, yeah? So if we would just look at it, that the meat absorbed the milk, and it's Isser Balua, and we just have to be Mavatal the milk, and it fell into a kosher fleshika pot, which has 240 ounces, so we only need to be Mavatal the 4 ounces, and we said we got Bittul B'Shishim. But since it's Chaticha Nasa Nevela, so therefore this cheeseburger we look at is 10 ounces of Isser. So 10 ounces Isser, you're going to need 600 ounces to be Mavatal, and the 240 is going to become Maser, because Chaticha Nasa Nevela. Okay? But if it wasn't Chalav, it was Chalav. So let's say this 6 ounces of kosher meat absorbed 4 ounces of blood or 4 ounces of chaylev, something which is shari surim. So according to Rabbeinu Ephraim, all you need to be mavatal is not the 10. You only need to be mavatal the Yisr. So if this thing falls into a pot with 240 ounces, you only need to be mavatal the 4 ounces. You only need to be about the 4 ounces of blood, the 4 ounces of chaylev, whatever the Yisr is. According to Rabbeinu Tam, he holds his nas and available b'shari surim, and you're gonna have to be mavatal the whole 10 ounces. That's a machlekes Rabbeinu Ephraim and Rabbeinu Tam. How exactly they explain the Gemara is that you have to learn Tosfos. Those are the basic shittas, and basically the Machaber is going to pass him like Rabbeinu Ephraim, and basically the Ramah is going to pass him like Rabbeinu Tam b'machmer, even b'shari surim.
Does Rabbeinu Ephraim answer the kasha on Rav?
He does, but not. It's beyond the scope because it's very hard to fit into the lashon. You have all Rashba explaining how Rabbeinu Ephraim learns this passage over here. You see over here, I said it's called chatich. It's called mehepshem mina. What does it matter? It's mina or not mina if it's nas and avela. Okay. Anyway, you can learn the Tosfos. It brings down all the different lashonos. We don't really have time to go into it. So therefore, that's what I mean over Rakasher Aver Tam Mamish Yochel Aser. Only if the tam of the Isser goes over Bishari Surim is it going to aser anything else. So if the kosher meat absorbed Tam Nevela, okay, only if that Tam Nevela will go into the pot is it going to aser it. Where that's Rabbeinu Tam, Rak Bedavish Nesem Mimasho and Chatich Nas Nevela. If it's an Isser Masho, then we don't say Nas Nevela. But if it's a nascent time, yeah, if there was enough, there was not Badal Bashishim, then we say Nas and Nevela. So that is the basic machlekes. So here is this is not even the whole Tosfos. This is only a piece of the Tosfos.
What's the example of a davar mashu over here that's not aser?
Well, the mashu is the Rab's case of min b'mina chatichas nevela with chatichas heter.
In other words, we're saying there was b'poel mamash only a tiny mashu.
Then he wouldn't say nas and nevela.
Is it that the town?
He would
that
answer the piece, but he wouldn't say it's nas and nevela to answer something else.
If thing is Bosor b'masho gives taste, a different taste from Bosor.
Talking about min b'minay.
When they say if it's not only if it's not b'masho, but what difference is if it gives taste or it doesn't give taste.
That means there was no bittul b'shishim. That's what it means. Neis and tam means there was no bittul b'shishim. So although the piece itself, again, the nafkamina is when this piece falls into something else. The piece itself you can't eat because it's a isra mashahu. According to Rav, maybe minole bottle. So the fact that there was even a little tiny bit of taste went from the nevela, a tiny little piece of nevela fell in, and there's a big piece of basar over there, basar kosher. Okay, it doesn't help you because also mashahu according to Rav Yehuda. Minole bottle. So the piece you can't eat. But now when this piece falls into another pot, do we have to make the calculation against the whole piece or only the little bit that absorbed from the nevela? So that's what Rav saying. Rav says, I hold that there's a chetichanas and nevela, not only bas b'chalav, even b'shari surah. But I'm not going to say it unless there was no bittul b'shishim. I am not going to say you have to measure against the whole piece, even though I hold that piece is prohibited. That piece is only prohibited because there's a mashu. That's not enough to make it nas and nevela that the whole piece, again, here's a piece. Here's a piece of something, a piece of meat. Here's a piece of meat. Okay? According to Rav Yehuda, it gets a mashahu, little tiny bit got absorbed over there. This is usher. Okay? But do we treat it like Issa Balua, that it's usher because it's got something in it and therefore we can't eat it? Or is it Issa because the whole thing became now like a piece of nevela? So Rabbeinu Ephraim says, we don't say nas and nevela only by bas b'chalav. If it's shari surim, we don't say nas and nevela at all. The Rav says, no, I will say nas and nevela. But it is a mashu is not enough to make this whole thing become usr. That it falls into something else. If it got 100 ounces of kosher and 1 ounce of isser in it, okay.
So it's a.
So I need to be mevatel the 1 ounce, or I need to be mevatel 101 ounces. So Rabbi Ephraim says, who cares? I mean, the whole thing is Shari Surim. I don't say Nas and Nevel at all. Of course, you only need it against the one. The Rav, even though he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, he's not going to let you eat the piece, even though it's both the Bashishim. But he says, to make this Nas and Nevela, to make it Aser another pot that you have to measure against 101, you can't eat it in and of itself, because maybe middle a bottle. But to make a Nas and Nevela, to Aser a whole other pot, you have to measure against 101, say Slay, unless there's no Betel Bashishim.
So by Nevela, it's not considered Chaticha Nas and Nevela to transfer to another thing.
Exactly.
But the whole piece is usher.
Exactly. That's what Nas and
We're
Nevela
not giving
means.
it. It's Nevela. We're not just giving it the rules of Nevela.
Exactly. That's what Nas and Nevela means. Very good. Look again. Just read the words of the Gemara. According to Rabbeinu Tam, that's exactly what the Gemara is saying. The words of the Gemara. The words of at least the first line of the Gemara after Uki Rav Meira. Yeah. Kiven shenosan tam b'chaticha. Since it was nascent tam, there was no bittul b'shishim. So in such a case, I'll say chaticha atzma nas and But the Shtorim Dekeshailis, it's usher anyway. Yes, it's usher to eat it itself, but it doesn't mean it's going to be nas and nevela to usher something else. You're going to have to measure against the whole thing. That's the way to bet it.
How does Rabbi Ephraim learn?
Again, we have to learn the rest of the Tosfos. Let's first get straight to the day is, and we'll go first. Omer Rabbeinu Tam. The go from mitzvah that even though it itself is also b'chol shehu, mikol makom le'amrim mishatas and nevel as kol acheres. We're still not going to say that it could be nas and nevel. What does it mean nas and nevel? It's also, what do you mean? What could be worse than that? No, it could answer other things too. We're not going to say it's nas and nevel as kol acheres. Kiven sheyatzmul in Nasrali de kol shehu. Since it was only us, al yidei kol shehu. It's only going to be nas and nevela if it to answer other things, unless you didn't have shishim. Rabbeinu Ephraim, Oyamer mitekach dafilu ki nos nebotam ein ater nas and nevela. That even if it was yenes in time, there was no bittul b'shishim. Shari surim, there's no such thing as nas and nevela. According to Rabbeinu Ephraim, ein ater nas and nevela shit starach shishim keneged kol hachaticha. Then you're going to need shishim against the whole piece. Ela keneged the isra balua. Only against the part that was absorbed. V'davka, the next highlighted part. V'davka gabi tipos. Cholav amrin lakam perakol Bosor, which was the piece we quoted last week. Lagabi tipos cholav. The chatichatz manas and nevela. V'tzorach shishim keneged kol hachaticha. V'leisage bebitul tipo lechut. And it's not enough just to nullify the drop of milk to fill it. Why? Mishum, because Bosor b'cholav is different. Bosor b'cholav. Rabbi Ephraim agrees that there's the kol chad b'chad ba'penafshe shari, that each one ba'penafshe by itself is permitted. V'ki isnahu, but when they come together b'hadi adadi with each other, also that makes a brand new iser. Hilka habasar atzmei nase iser, and therefore the meat itself becomes also v'leiki imachol chatzayis b'basar b'chatzayis machal. So machlekes in the Gemara will paskin. If you have a half a zayis of bus, half a zayis cholav, you get malchus. You don't get malchus. Chatzis also minutator, but you don't get malchus unless you eat a kazayis. So here's only half a zayis of each one because it made a new iser. V'lakach tzarich bereitiv shishim labatul kol achaticha shenofla leish tipas cholav. And that's why we learned in last week's shiur, and then we learned in this Gemara daf kuf ches, that if the piece was hutlareitiv and it became didn't have shishim against the milk that fell into it, then you're going to need shishim against the entire piece. But that's what possible cholif. Al v'chatichas het shabala tam nevela. But if you have a piece of kosher meat and it absorbed the taste of nevela, v'nesra, now it's aser, it's a tam balua. V'chazer of nosan tam bereitiv, and now this piece gave taste into the gravy. It's sorach l'shishim levatel le'eser shenivle b'chaticha. It's not nas and nevela, says Rabbi Ephraim. You only need shishim against the prohibited thing that was, let's say, blood, chalif, whatever it was, nevela. And you don't need shishim against the entire. So that is the machlekes of Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbeinu Ephraim. So here we have a summary of this din. So here we have Bosor b'cholov. So that everybody agrees. There's no shishim against that drop. Very big drop. Shari surim, here you got a drop of blood flowing into the kosher meat. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins like Ben Ephraim, and he holds ein chtichanas in the. Yeah. So the iser, if this piece then falls into something else, you need shishim against what? Against the blood or against the meat?
Blood.
Against just the blood, according to the Mechaber. But
Is
according
the
to the
Chaticha
Rama, yesh
recognized
chanan, he
after
passes
that?
like Rabbeinu Tam, and you're going to need shishim against the whole piece because he holds chedichanas and nevel b'shari surim. Question?
Yeah, is the after it falls into another one, is the chaticha recognized and then it's still batal, or do you have to take out the chaticha?
Well, if you recognize it, you take out the chaticha. The question is, if it was already cooked in there, you didn't get it out, before the tam was released into the rest of it. It's too late already. You have to be mashar against the whole thing. The question over here is, anytime you have any isser which is bittul, in general, the inyan of bittul does not apply when something is nikah. Okay, so you'll learn later on what happens if you have, if you cool something off, and the fat could go to the surface, So right now you can't recognize it, but if you had some soup, let's say you had some chaylev that fell in, or you had is that called a nicker because you could get it out somewhere. Anyway, anytime you have an issa which is nicker, you have to remove it. There's no question. Question is the belia, when it went into the rest of the taste went into the rest of the pot. You need shishim against the piece or shishim just against the issa that it absorbed.
I think his question was, does the meat also, can you count the meat towards as part of the shishim against the blood?
Well, that's obvious.
meat
But the question is when it's still like nicker in the thing, like you say, like, oh, it fell in the thing, but it's all good because I only have to measure against the tipas iser.
You're saying according to the Mechaber?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so according to the Mechaber, how you're mitzvah of things to bittul, you learn later on.
Oh.
Okay? It's not so simple. I'd like to give you a
Okay.
simple answer, but it's not such a simple answer.
Okay.
But there are many cases where you can use that to be mavatul. You'll use that piece itself that the excuse me, that the blood fell into. You can use that itself to be mavatul the blood, but not once it's nas and avela. Once according to Ramah, it's nas and avela, then it's farfal. Okay. So that's the difference. In yesh shishim, the tafshel keneged atipas dam, aval ein shishim keneged kol hachaticha. So in such a case, what's the din? What do you say?
Machlekes mechaber Rama.
Machlekes mechaber Rama. Exactly. Shulchan Aruch say nas and ein chanan b'shari surah, and therefore tafshel muter b'chaticha surah. The chaticha is still aser. Okay, because you don't have shishim. The chaticha became prohibited because it absorbed tam chalav. There's no shishim in the piece against the dam. But as far as the rest of the pot that it fell into, there's no chanan b'shari surim according to the Mechaber, but according to the Rama, okay, it fell in. Goodbye. According to the Rama, yesh chanan b'shari surim. Therefore, the whole tafshil is also because we need shishim against the piece. We don't have shishim against the piece, and the story. Good. It's not good for the pot, but it's we understand, yeah. Fine. Let's go further. Now let's learn inside the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, according to Ramah, the whole thing is Aser. So now let's see Machaber Ramah. So basically, you have these two sifim, Gimel Dalit. Gimel is about Bosor b'cholov, and Dalit is about Shari Surim. A long Ramah and Sif Dalit. Many dinim in the Ramah. That's the main limud that's going to keep us busy today. Different aspects of the Ramah, but we have this basic idea. So, Sif Gimel. So remember, this is Behemshech the Siv base, where we had Tipas Cholav. Yeah, that was the Gemara in Kovches. That it said over there that if the piece was Chutz L'Reitiv, so then you need Shishim against in the piece against the Tipas Cholav that fell into it. And then it was Nasan Avela, and if later on it fell into the pat, remember the person only was stirred it up at the end, so then it fell in. So then you need Shishim against the whole thing. So then the entire piece becomes prohibited. Then if you cook this piece together with other things, the pieces, so if you need Shishim against the entire Chaticha. And if you recognize the piece, if you can tell which piece was the one that was prohibited, mashlicha. V'acheres mutaris. Okay, so then as long as you have Shishim, the one piece that you found there, throw it away, and you can eat the rest because you had Shishim. What about Bimena Makira? What do you do if you can't recognize it? So to have a complete answer to this question, we're going to have to wait till the end of today's shir. We're going to have to wait till we finish Sif Dalet and the Ramah. Okay, it's a passion. But over here, as we'll soon see, the Mechaber is talking about these were choshev pieces, like the pieces in the picture. Those are pieces, you'd order in a restaurant. It's a chetich royal skabed, and it's not bottle. And therefore, b'meina makira. So then, if you can't recognize the piece, so chetich royal skabed le bottle. Therefore, the hareitev mutter. The rest of the soup you can eat. But all of the pieces are aser. If it's a chetich royal skabed, so then, like mentioned before, if it's a big piece choshev to serve guests, so then it's not bottle. So therefore, the one piece which is aser prohibits all the other pieces which are mutter. You got to get rid of all the pieces. But the rest of the reitiv, that's only the piece itself becomes aser. But the rest of the reitiv is only b'neis and tam. If you had shishim against the piece which is aser, you can eat the rest of the soup, gravy, whatever it is, this reitiv. Okay, so that's the din of Bosor b'chol. What about Shari Surim? Sifdalit. Like who?
Ben Ephraim.
Like a Ben Ephraim. Avaleh b'Shari Surim. No such thing as Nasa Nevela b'Shari Surim. Again. You have a piece of forbidden fat that got absorbed into a piece of kosher. And you don't have 60 times more in the piece against the chaylev that got absorbed. And therefore, the piece is now prohibited because there's no bittul b'shishim. That's all in of Nas and Avela is not about eating the piece itself. The piece itself is also that we agree. When we say Nas and Avela, it's lagabe or something else. Now you cook this piece, which is now prohibited. You cooked it with other pieces. Now, do you need shishim against the chaylev it absorbed, or do you need chaylev against the entire piece? If we don't say Nas and Avela like Rabbi Ephraim, then you just have to be mavatal chaylev. And if we're going to say Nas and Avela like Rabbi Tam, so then you're going to need shishim against the piece. What is the Machaber Paskin? Paskin Rabbi Ephraim. So ain't tzarich el shishim kadei ksayas chaylev. All the Mefarshim say it's not dafka ksayas. He's picking the lashon ksayas, but even if it's less than a ksayas, same thing would apply. So you need shishim to be mavatal liyaseh. Vaz afil lachaticha atzma chazeres liyas muteres. And then the piece itself also becomes mutter. Now, this last phrase of afil lachaticha atzma chazeres liyas muteres, we're going to have to come back to because we have to understand exactly what this means over here. I'm not like a shachantas about exactly how to understand that last statement. Why should you be able to eat this piece? What exactly is going on over here? But the general picture, let's get the close, take a picture first to understand the general parameters. However, along comes the Haggah, the Ramah says, however, there's another opinion, that even in other things aside from Bosor b'chol, if we say Chaticha Atzma Nasis Nevelam, I can't a minik Poshet Bein Lashanes. That is the minik Ashkenaz to say Chaticha Nasis Nevelam B'Shari Surim, and you can't Ein Lashanes. clear. It's a minig, nas minig Yisrael Teirehi, that we say nas nevela b'shar yisur. Okay, so that is the basic idea. I think he has in the slide over here what to do with this line in the mechaber now. Oh yeah, he has it right here. So what do we do with this? Why is the chaticha mutter? Remember, we had our introduction where we said efshel usachte, a machlekes efshel usachte aser, efshel usachte mutter. So here, why is it that this piece itself is also mutter? Are you saying efshel usachte mutter? Because now we say that it fell into a pot, and we have shishim against the chaylev. So now, what are you going to say? The piece before became aser, but now it fell into this big pot, and now the chaylev got spread out in the whole pot. So now that the chaylev is all spread out, no, okay, so it goes back to its heter because we don't have nice and tam in the chatich anymore. So it looks like over here the mechaber is paskening the efshel usachte mutter. However, you look later on Ilchos Tarubas, he says no, efshel usachte aser, and that's a steer in the mechaber. Ilchos Tarubas sim kovav right over there in Sefav. Mechaber peisish a chatich nesra eno chazeres lias materes. It never becomes mutter, even if it fell into something that would, if it was evenly distributed, then we could say that the chaylev went out, it was evenly distributed in the whole pot, and now there's no more shishim. And the Ramah points out, if you remember, this is Simon Kuvav, he says, you remember you learned in Tzaddik base, Sif Dalit, that the Mechaber said that the piece becomes mutter. And over here he says it becomes aser. The main thing is like he says over here on Simon Kufov. That's what the Ramah says over there on Simon Kufov. That the main thing is that it's aser. The shaila is, what does this mean over here? So the two terutzim machlek shach and taz. So the taz, bisla deche can cause of the Berel fishitas a tour. Avaleke ke the Berel belchos tarus. That the tour is machzik b'shita efshel asach the mutter. Okay, so he's quoting already the Torah, so he's quoting the Torah, so he puts in this line from the Torah also. Sometimes once you're quoting a Pesach, we see sometimes you see in Divrei Apostle they'll quote the whole thing, even though they don't hold from certain prat. But it's very unusual that you see such a thing. And anyway, that's the Taz's answer. The Shach has another answer. A very push the terraces of Shach. What is the mechtichas mechazeres lias materes? Means you don't know. It's not pshat that we know which piece fell in, and we're going to say now it became what we're going to eat it anyway. No, that's not what we're talking about. It fell in. It was a tarubas. We can't tell the identity of different pieces. So Shulchan Aruch have davar on mikra she'eni yodei eni yadua mi yachatich shenesra. You don't know which piece it is. It's bottled. This piece is bottled, but the rest are chatichas. When you have chatichas, and it's going to come up later in today's shiur, so might as well chazer over. In general, we have different types of tarubas. You have tarubas yovesh v'yovesh. You have tarubas lach b'lach. You have, let's say, two liquids mixed together. That's one thing. You have two solids mixed together. You have chatichas. Let's say you have a bag. Let's say they're not even cooked. You have chatichas. So there's a bunch of pieces of a bunch of kosher hot dogs in a bag. There was a barbecue and a bunch of kosher hot dogs all put together in a bag. And somehow one of somebody from the next barbecue, one of the hot dogs fell into the thing. You can't tell; they all look the same. So you have a tarubas yovesh b'yovesh, and you have a nevela over there. So in general, we say the din yovesh b'yovesh tarubas is it's a whole din. It's also in Shulchan Aruch. Not going to learn it all on 1 foot, but in general, we say the din that it's batal b'reiv. Achar rab lahates, and you can't tell which one is which. It's yovesh b'yovesh, and therefore it's batal b'reiv. So over here, he's going to say all of the chatichas and mutters at the shach. Why is he saying that? Because we don't know which is which. If we knew which one was which, then we'd taka throw it out. We don't know which one is which. The chaticha became mutter, meaning you don't have to answer all the chatichas, because the chaticha is batal in the other chatichas. So that is.
This is even if it's a chaticha or a schapet.
Evidently not. Chaticha schapet would not be bottled. Shaila is again that we don't really call it a chaticha or schapet unless it's a isamach masatzma. So therefore, if it was a chaticha roy l'skabed, like it would be nevela, then tak would be usher. But over here we're talking iser balua. So the iser is not roy l'skabed. What, you have a little chaylev that got absorbed into the meat? That's not roy l'skabed. It's the iser is not bottled when the iser is roy l'skabed. So when it's the iser balua, the bali is not roy l'skabed. Because some dam fell in, and this dam is roy l'skabed. You say, here, you're my guest. Here's a tipas dam. Here's a half a kazayas melted chaylev. I mean, it's not roy l'skabed. Okay. Fine. So now we have some other, the rest of today's shiur is basically all different cases of where we have wiggle room in this Ramah. In other words, where the cases with the Ramah is machmer. However, he does not completely disregard the opinion of Rabbi Ephraim. When we have other reasons to be mekel, sometimes the Ramah himself or other achreinim will say, you know what, perhaps the Rubi could be mekel, you can put it together with another heter, different timing, lahater. And that's what we're going to be discussing, all different sorts of cases about when it might be possible to give a heter. So case number one, do we say Hanan with the Issa D'Rabban? You have an Issa D'Rabban. You have Issa D'Rabban, let's say, Stam Yenim. You have Yain Nesach is an Issa D'Iraisa. If it was mamish used for a Veda Zara, it's a Issa D'Iraisa. But you have Stam Yenim, let's say, you have a Muslim made wine. Okay, so Cham Mogeis, if the Muslims are not able to Veda Zara, it's another story. But the Veda Zara, they believe in Achtas Hashem. So they're not going to be, and Bachal, they don't drink wine. Okay, but the Cham Mogeis are on all Nachrim. The same, they touch the wine, you're not allowed to eat the wine. The wine is also midrabban. Many other cases, wine, say Yain Nesach means that it's also midraisa in general. And the Rambam counts as one of Tayyar mitzvahs, Yain Nesicham and Hazina. And, but Stam Yain mitzvahs and Nisa D'Rabban. So if that falls into, we say Chanas and Vela, let's say you have the Chalav Shchuta. We learned before in some Pezayin that if the animal was slaughtered and you take the milk from the udder, so then the Bosor Chalav is only midrabban. So let's say, forget about Shari Surim for a minute. Let's say it's even Bosor Chalav. In Bosor Chalav, shenich b'sho yachad heifchen lias kanabela. When you do kavush, so we say kavush kemavushel. Okay, so we said lagabe the issa Bosor Chalav to say that it's also bana. So we said at the beginning of some Pezayin derech bishla asra teira. Okay, but what about? So therefore, that in general, kavush is kavush kemavushel malech karasech. We talk about malichas one too. But as far as kavush is concerned, when it comes to Bosor B'chalav, since it's not that official, it's only midrabban. So do we say it becomes chaticha nas and avela? It's not a machlekes. The Rambam holds and Shulchan Aruch holds and chatichas in chanan b'is the rabban. There's the rabbanan. There's no chanan. No machlekes m'chaber Ramah, but the Ramah passing like the Rash. But yesh chanan b'is the rabban. Okay, Prima God brings down. Ain't lakel. You're not allowed to be making. That speaks about that. Dinach Kchal, we skipped this in Tzadik basically. Yeah. About brings it out from over there that there's no chatichas in the Bela in the case of kavush. But the Ramah we paskin that even if it's an Issa D'Rabbanan, we still have Chanan, even an Issa D'Rabbanan. Good. And now we come to a big topic. Hopefully, you know what? I think we'll finish this. It's going to go to the break, but there's a number of pratim over here. Lach balach. Lach balach. You have two liquids. Isser nasally. You have a prohibition, liquid prohibition. Shanav will take heter nasally. Lay or shishim connect. Let's say you have cholav treif. Talk about it soon. You have non-kosher milk from a non-kosher animal. Cholav tamei, cholav treifa. So if it's a non-kosher species like a camel, so the milk is also deraisa. If there was a kosher animal like a cow, but it was a treifa, It's also asa deraisa. Okay. So now let's say it fell into something else, another liquid, which is kosher. Do we say nas nevela when it comes lach balach? And guess what? You have a machlekes. And over here, the Ramah is going to give a little nasinas makom over here. Some cases living back. So here we poured some stam yenam. We poured into some milk. Okay. Yeah, machlekes are paskim when you so the isra of stam yenam, whether you need shishim against stam yenam, whether it's good enough sheish. Bittul b'sheish, a special din by yayin by stam yenam, for non-kosher wine, and that's in general we say that when it goes into water. Wine got diluted in water, we say bittul b'sheish. Shaila is when you put it into things other than water, does it also apply? That's a big machlekes. Yeah, sometimes the kashrus agencies use that heter also, but in general, here it's saying that you need shisha. Okay, so it's lach balach. What's the din? The Rashba and the Rosh say yesh chanan lach balach. It applies lach balach also. Why not? So therefore, hacholav habach liyas is a batsman. So therefore, now the chalav is also. V'im yasifu chalav kosher yitztar choshishim keneged kol hachalav. Okay, let's say you have 30 ounces of milk, and it falls in an ounce of wine, and we're paskening you need bittul b'shishim. So it's 1 out of 30. It's not 1 out of 60. It's awesome. Okay. Now let's say somebody put in another 30 ounces of milk. So now we got 60 ounces of milk against an ounce of wine. Do we say now that it's bittul b'shishim? So according to the Rashba and the Rosh, we no. There's no bittul b'shishim. Why? Because since we say chanan, even lach balach, so therefore, when the 1 ounce of wine, same thing would be blood or anything else, any liquid, and it fell into the milk, so then we have 31 ounces of iser. You got another 30 ounces of milk. What good is that? You don't even have bittul b'reif. You got 31 ounces of iser and 30 ounces of heter. Because we say, even though it's lach balach, we say chanan. Therefore, it's also. But the Rabbi holds, and the Mordechai, ain't chanan balach balach. He holds there's no iser nas and nevel lach balach, and therefore, when it fell in the first time, the taka became musr. But the milk itself didn't become musr. It's like iser below. It absorbed some iser below. And yisifu chalav kosher. It only stop a b'shishim keneged the iser. So therefore, you're going to put in another 30 ounces of milk. So then it's going to become mutter, according to the Rabbi, because he says there's no iser nas and nevela lach balach. What's the reason for this? So the Taz brings down Mordechai a couple of reasons which are brought for it that when you have a salad, so the salad is a davar choshev. Salad davar choshev. You have a salad, a piece of something, and you're going to aser it, okay? And then we say it's nasa nevela. And then let's say later on some more heter got added to it, and then it became mutter. So like, how is anybody going to tell the difference between a heter and a iser? Right before this exact same piece was aser, and now this exact same piece is mutter. So it's like sort of a gezerah. People can get mixed up between this piece and that piece. So therefore, the solid piece you have to be gazer. But a liquid, you don't have the liquid. You don't have the same thing. When you have a liquid, so everybody sees that this is twice as much. The whole thing is a shinoi. You're going to need a whole new metzias to go and add a whole lot more to it. So therefore, you don't have to be that mach. Another reason is given that when you have solids, so somebody asked this a couple of shiurim ago, like, why do you have to be measuring against the whole thing? When you have a solid, we saw it also when we were discussing the idea of a piece that was half in and half out of the reitif. It doesn't necessarily get evenly distributed in the whole thing. So therefore, when we say nasa nevela, so this piece might have more of this, or that piece might have less than this. Or then when you poured in later on more of the heter, there's, by the way, still this problem of mabatal lisul lachatchila. You can't do this on purpose. Okay, but if accidentally it happened, okay. So who said once this thing became usher, just because you added a bunch of heter, who says it got evenly distributed? Okay, but if it was lach balach, then it does get evenly distributed. Once it's lach balach, so we consider the things we discussed this earlier. We're talking about damasor, damapar, damasoir, that. But the min b'minas, we also said when it's a davar lach, things get evenly distributed, and there's more of an asinas makam lahatir. Okay, so we have a machlekes rishenim. Do we say chanan if it's lach balach? So what does the Ramah do with this? So the Ramah put together two days of the rishenim, and he says as follows: we have a heter from the Rav and Mordechai if it's lach balach, that there's no chanan, there's no chadich, and that's not there's the lach balach. Okay, we don't pass it like that. Okay, we don't pass it like that. We don't disregard it altogether, because we're going to add to it another heter, heter of Ben Ephraim. He holds b'chal b'shari surim there's no nas in the veil. So what are you worried? The wine came in. Who says nas in the veil? According to Ben Ephraim, the whole thing doesn't start the whole problem of chanan, because of shari surim. So the Ramah says the minig is not to be lenient like Rabbi Ephraim. And he also doesn't want to be makel like the Ravid and say that there's no chanan because lach balach. But if it's both lach balach and a shari surim, so then the Ramah says, okay, this I can hear already. And this is the Ramah says. Yeshemrim, says the Ramah, the lay amrin chatich nasas navelim nisar v'serlach betalach. That if it was lach balach, so then there's no problem. If it was a isolach betalach v'achach nisar v'hakol beheterach, and later on it got mixed into another heter, so then do we need shishim against the original iser v'heter, like the 30 ounces of milk with the 1 ounce of blood? Or do we only need against the 1 ounce of blood? So says so he's quoting this day of the Rav and Mordechai. Is the yesh shemrim? How does the Ramah pass him? The yesh lismech al zeh b'shar isurim l'tzeireh hefsed gadol. And if it's hefsed gadol, you can put these two heterim together. Avalei bosor b'chalav. That if it's bosor b'chalav, they got mixed together lach balach. So then, sorry, we're not relying on the Ravid for that. If it's shari surim, we have the heter of Ben Ephraim, and we have the heter that it's lach balach, and we have hefsed gadol. So then, says the Ramah, you could be making. Now, when do you balance? You might have a close sticker question, and it's a very good question. Like, how does this hachra work? You find any rishonim, and you have two, then hefsed move, it's okay. Are there klolim in this? So the short answer to that question is no, there are no klolim. There are klolim in this, but when it comes down to the exceptions of the klolim, you have more exceptions almost than you have the klal. So in this case, the Ramah will put two shitas rishonim together. The same, the Ramah will in another case not put two shitas together. But in this case, we have lach balach together with shari surim, hefsed gadol. The Ramah is mekel. That's psak of the Ramah. Now, there's another issue which is brought up by the Taz, of course, the Mashal. Is there a difference between if it's cold or if it's hot? So the Mashal comes along with a Psachidish. And Mashal says that if they're cold, Bachal, there's no Nas and Avela. Kishe'eser v'heter tzeinin mutter. Kishe'eser v'heter chamim masr. Hil aser lach balach, the Mashal, but only when they were hot. If they were cold, so the Mashal is going to be mekel. So the Ramah says, B'chal, it's only in the case of hefsed gadol, we could be mekel. There's Igros Meisha, the very, very practical case that they were making vinegar in Europe, and all the places that were making vinegar, the kalim, were treif from making wine vinegar. And the wine was nesed rabban. And the time was going, it was a liquid to a liquid. So the Igros Meisha said that it's nesed rabban and yesh lahak. Not 100% clear whether they said it's only behefsid. You don't need hefsed gadol, we need a little bit of hefsed, or maybe you could be mekel even without any hefsed at all. Not 100% clear in Igros Meisha. You're at their base, and Yeah, but the Igris Mesha has such a kula, and Lamaisa, we don't really hold by this differentiation of the Marshal, that even if it's Shari Surim, we're only going to be Mekel Behefsikol. Now, a practical case, he constructed an interesting case over here, and I think maybe I'll take a couple of minutes to give you another interesting case. So here's a case of a milk factory. So a milk factory, what they did, they're making a Chalav Yisrael factory. So here they're taking milk out of the truck, came from the cows into the truck, and from the truck into the silo, and they filled it up with kosher milk. Kosher milk, right? Then the next truck put it into the wrong silo. It wasn't supposed to put that milk into the silo. It was supposed to put another silo, and they had the chalav treifa. Now, how do you have chalav treifa? So I think I mentioned when we were talking about chalav nimsa b'keva, that the keva is in English or Latin, whatever language it is called the yabba masum. 4 stomachs in a cow. So I mean, there's many different ways, all different sorts of treifas in a cow. But one of the very common treifas that we have today in the dairy farm is DA cows. This is called displaced abba masum. Did I discuss this when we learned chalav nimsa b'keva?
You did discuss the Abu Masim.
Okay, the Abba Masum, yeah, but the displaced Abba Masum, I don't know if I discussed. Yeah, so what happens is because of the way they treat the cows and the way they feed them, all the abnormal raising procedures, so the keva, the Abba Masum, is supposed to be on the bottom. So what happens, it gets out of place. You got the right displaced Abba Masum, you got the left displaced Abba Masum. It slips up on one of the 2 sides, and it's very uncomfortable for the cow, and the cow stops giving so much milk, and the cow's in pain. Cow could even die in a very severe case. So what they do is they do a surgery for displaced Abba Masum, and those are called DA cows, displaced Abba Masum cows, and they do surgery. Often in the surgery, the normal way to do the surgery, they make a puncture in the keva. Nikava keva is a treifa. So if you make a hole in this Abba Masum, the cow is treif, and all the milk it gives after that point is all chalav treifa. And this is one of the big questions in the milk industry when it comes to Chalav Yisrael farms, or the Chalav Yisrael. It's one of the jobs of Mashgiach to take care of these DA cows to make sure that they're not going into the Chalav Yisrael production. But in the Chalav Akum, Chalav Stam, whatever you want to call it, so the senior Chalav Treifa, the companies are mainly, the kashrus agencies, so basically hoping it's less than shishim, but nobody really knows. There's no real good statistics taken on it. It's a whole other subject, but chalav treifa could very, very easily be found. In any case, what happened over here? So you have over here, they filled it up with chalav kosher. Then they put in some chalav treifa, and there's no shishim. And then they filled up the rest with chalav kosher. So the shaila is the exact shaila we had before. Is it nasan avela, or is it not nasan avela? If it's nasan avela, the milk you put in is not going to be shishim against the whole milk that was there originally with the chalav treifa. If it's not, so then you'll have bittul b'shishim. So what does the Rama say? What's the din?
This would be a hefsed gadol, no?
Hefsed gadol, you can be matir. This is just it's a side question, but you know when things come down to real life, they become like messy, a little messy over there. You call this a hefsed gadol or not?
Depends on the company size.
Right, we can't see the scale. Next to the truck.
It's a very, very big, it's a big silo. A lot of milk. But that's not the question. The question is who's hefsed? If you're talking about the company's hefsed, so for the company it's hefsed gadol, right?
Is the company
If you're
even a Jewish company?
If you're a consumer who says you have to buy this milk, you can buy another brand of milk. For you, it's hefsed. You's not a hefsed.
Whoever's in possession of it, the company is the one in possession of it. So then it's a hefsed.
Okay. It's a discussion. Okay, so yeah, you're buying milk. The milk says on it mahadrin min mahadrin l'shem b'reshvis, you know, with all sorts of shvachim on it, with all sorts of fancy emblems and stemplach from Rabbanim Chashuvim, picture of somebody with a beard, long beards. It's mamish.
They followed Shulchan Aruch. This is
Kedush
Torah. This is Shulchan Aruch.
That's not the yeah, which means what? That the milk is okay, but Seirach Gadol. So for you, is it Seirach Gadol?
Well, if you want that company to continue delivering milk, then it could be.
Okay, it's a discussion in the poskim. It's a discussion in the poskim, and many of the poskim will say, you know, it's not for now, but you should just know that different kashrus agencies have different policies. Okay, and if people are buying something and it says mahadrin mina mahadrin, and doesn't necessarily mean, depending on the policy of that particular kashrus agency, whether the thing you're buying is taka mahadrin minhadrin, or even when it's mahadrin, or it's just b'diavad kosher. I'm just mentioning it not to ruin anybody's business, but there are very, very big differences among kashrus agencies how they approach us. Okay, so lachish l'tiv b'chalav kosher, yeshishim b'chalav kosher, mul chalav b'treif. So what's din of chalav b'treif for isra min ha'teira? Chalav treif doesn't mean ha'teira. So then you can be only behafsid gadol. Let's say it was chalav akum there. Chalav akum is isra rabbanan. What will be the din? What do we say? Lach balach is the rabbanan. What did Rav Meisha say? Yishlakim. Chalav akum shos rakim the rabbanan. Yishlater afil behafsid muat. Hefsid muat. Others say the Rav Meisha would matter even without hefsid muat. This is the rabbanan. If you know about it, you can't do it. In some cases, even if it was done, you give a knas, and you don't even allow it to be used b'diavad. That you learn in the beginning of Hilchos Taruvos about the isser of im bevat l'nisel chatchila. In some cases, even b'diavad, it could be usher. Okay, I'm going to break here, but I'm just going to mention one other case briefly. So I think at least one person on the call is probably aware of this. Just an interesting application of this din. So when you kasher kalim, there's such a thing. When you kasher kalim, you have to kasher kalim only after tam pogum, only after reina ben yemen. You have to leave the keli unused for 24 hours, then you can kasher it. What happens if you kasher it beforehand? So then there's a day that says you can kasher it twice. That if you kasher it once, so you're taking out some of the taste in the water, but there's not going to be bittul b'shishim. Dump the water, and then cook up water a second time, and the second time you already have bittul b'shishim. Now the Rebbe brings us down Hilchos Pesach. Lagabe shah chamishis, when chametz is already aser, and the keli was not a eina ben yema yet. So the Alter Rebbe brings down the day of kashering it twice. One comes to Tamach Tzedek and Piskei Dinim and says, I don't understand. It's nas and a little water. If you don't have shishim, you have a chametz absorbed in the walls of the keli, and you're going to cook water in there, and there's no bittul b'shishim against it. So why does it go down? Well, it's nas and nevela, tzarachian. Alter Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, asked for tzarachian on the psak of the Alter Rebbe. And he leaves it at tzarachian. So the fact is, there are some Chol Yisrael cheese companies that's what they do. It's very, very difficult to get companies to close down for 24 hours. Dairy companies especially. So there was a Chol Yisrael cheese company, and they would kasher the kalim twice, kasher ben yemet twice. So Rabbi Hendel of Shalom wouldn't tell people not to use this heter and not to use this Chol Yisrael cheese. Why? They even though the Alter Rebbe allows it, but there's a tzarachian and the Tzemach Tzedek. And so the tzarachian and the Tzemach Tzedek is so not to have it. Anyway, so even though he had a teretz for the tzarachin and tzemach tzedek, he had actually 3 terutzim for the tzarachin and tzemach tzedek. He said, but the tzemach tzedek also knew his 3 terutzim, and he still had a tzarachin. So he didn't write 3 terutzim tzemach tzedek, but anyway, that's what Rabbi said. Anyway, later on it came. Shmuel, I ended up. I wrote this. This is printed in Mamlechas Kenim from Rabbi Endel's son, Shmuel Yosef. So I wrote down after he was nifter Rabbi Endels, I wrote down some of his interesting psukim in the Sefer. Here I go, Scale, Manamar Zak, Positive Sim Top and Base, Shalach or Chamishis. At a Pesach, Efshel lahagol kli ben yemish tepom. That was the shot. Rav Endel gave a teretz according to the Taz in the din that we just learned about lach balach. And he says, mayim b'mayim, if you have a tam, he brings it in this Taz here, tzaddik base of cotton tesvash, mayim b'mayim, mutar afil b'li efsam meruba. You don't even need efsam. But if it's lach balach, so then you need hefsam meruba according to the Ramah. But if it's mayim b'mayim, it's even better. You have a tam which is blue in the mayim. I'll call Hashanim le'rotz lismach al tirutze. Begimel time and why he didn't want to rely on this teretz. Bosor kamek vinus mishum atzarachin shel tzamach tzedek. That I heard from the Bnei Mishpacha, Seif Yomov, that once Igros was printed, so there's a letter over there, it's the Igros Chelek Ches Omad Tzadik Dalet, that somebody asked the Rebbe, not this din, but another din with the Tzamach Tzedek writes a Tzorachin on the Alter Rebbe, and the Rebbe answered, Ein lichas psaktin borim marmar azog mishum Tzorachin shel Tzamach Tzedek. So the Tzamach Tzedek disagrees clearly with the Alter Rebbe, then he writes it clearly, then we go like the Tzamach Tzedek. But if he only has a Tzorachin, the Alter Rebbe writes clear, and the Tzamach Tzedek writes Tzorachin, he's Kim Shekenu Benidin the Dan Vehittif, and he allowed using the cheese because it was only a Tzorachin and Tzamach Tzedek. Anyway, so this is the Inyan Alach Balach. Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break and continue.
Quick question. Does it make a difference how you pour the lach, if you pour the heter lach into iser lach?
What do you mean?
The first drop becomes also.
Into a heter?
If you you're constantly pouring heter into iser, so you'll never have shishim against the heter, against the iser, because every drop you pour in.
Okay, so you're going to be nas and a like kama bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Pashtus is talking about that it fell in all at once. Yeah. Good point. I didn't really see it discussed, but Pashtus would be. Okay, take a 10-minute break. It's now 8:24. We'll continue 8:34 minutes. Okay, so what we covered so far is, in general, the opinion of Hanan was B'cholav, Machlekes Lagabe Shari Surim, and and what is the din of Hanan with an Issa D'Rabbanan, and what is the din of Hanan lach balach. And now we're going to have some more cases of variations of when does Hanan apply and when does it not apply. Okay, so now we have Hanan with a davar yovish. Okay, so here we have 4 pieces of treifa, vela treifa, whatever it is, non-kosher meat, and 3 pieces of kosher meat. So we say in general, the din of yovish v'yovish is bittul bereif. So what do you say about this taruvas? You understand that if it was this color, then you take the treifa ones and throw them out. But in reality, this is a special color filter which shows klippus nega and shows klippus atmeis. Okay, so shows klippus atmeis shows up gray in this filter. But in real life, they both look like the same piece of meat. So you can't tell which one is treif and which one is not treif. That's why you have a taruvas. Otherwise, you just get rid of treif. So now, okay, we say bittul bereif, but over here the reiv is treif. So all of these 7 pieces are considered to be treif. Okay, so we can't eat any of the 7 pieces. Now, the question is, what happens? Do we say that it's nasa nevela? Let's say each one of these things weighed, I don't know, 10 ounces. Each one, weight, volume, whatever it is, how you Messiah thinks is another thing. Let's say volume. It's a volume of 7 fluid ounces, each one. What I said, 10 fluid ounces, there's 7, and so altogether there's 70 ounces of meat, of which 40 is is a treifa, and 30 is kosher. Now, let's say all of them fall into a pot. Now, how much do we need to be mavatal? Do we say that it's nasa nevela, and we need to be mavatal against all 7 pieces, and we need to take the 70 ounces and be mavatal at tamshishim, which is 4.2 ounces, yeah? Or do we only need to be mavatal the 4? Do we say nasa nevela or not? So again, nasa nevela is usually used in a context where this fell into something else. Okay, because right now you can't eat any of these 7 pieces because the kosher ones are bottled. Okay, but now when it fell into something else, if it's nasa nevela, you need to mavatal all 7. If it's not nasa nevela, you only need to mavatal the 4. So what's the din? So you can't eat these pieces. But as far as it answering something else, so we don't say nasa nevela. So if it fell into the pot, what's the din? All 7 fell into the pot. What's the din? What do you have to be mavatal? Maspik shishim keneged chateichas hatreifa. V'lo tzarich keneged kol. So that's muskam that we don't have in a tarubas yavish v'yavish. We do not have nasa nevela. And now the question is, which 4 do you measure against? Because if you knew which 4 they were, we assume all of these are not exactly the same size. It was made with the copy and paste on a computer program. They're all identical, but in real life, they're not usually identical size. So how do you know which ones to measure against? So if a pashtus in such a situation, you would take the 4 biggest. You machmer, you take the 4 biggest. Okay. Next din, another case of malicha. So we covered kovesh kemavushel, and now we have maliach keraseach. Let's say you have something which absorbed through salt. So we know when it comes to Bosor b'cholav that there's no issa d'oraisa because it's not derech bishul. But right now, although we're learning hilchos Bosor b'cholav, right now we're talking about shari surim. Because Bosor b'cholav, everybody holds nasa nevela. Shaila is what happens when it comes malicha. So let's take first the din of shari surim. So here we have some nevela, which is the gray piece, and then we have some kosher, which is the red piece. And what happens? So we have a chatichas heter shekib latam chatichas iser, chatichas heter nasa kul nevela. Normally we say nasa nevela. That's b'chal the din. So it's going to answer it. We don't have bit. We could be mated in the case of malicha. And this, even though normally we say by dover shaman, we have certain chumras, and although matzadik radim we say malicha only asks kadei klippa, but lemaisa we're more machmer than that. But over here, in the case of hefsa meruba, there is room to be makel, and as I said, even though in dover shaman normally we're machmer, in this case, even if it's dover shaman, you're still going to be makel. Okay, so flying back to the top. Okay, now this is going to take a little bit longer. Those were shorter. Now we have a iser dovuk. Iser dovuk, as I explained before. So here's a piece of kosher meat. The only problem is that there's some chaylev on top. So we don't normally do too much nikur today. The parts that have chaylev, mamish, b'chal don't come into the butcher shop l'chatchila. We leave them there. Okay, when you pass the 12th rib, so then you have a piece of chaylev you have to take off over there. There's a certain amount of nikur that we do. But here, let's take a piece which has chaylev mamish on it. So the meat underneath is 100% kosher. And the chaylev on top of it is the isakaris. So when you do nikur, you take the chaylev and you cut it off, and then you salt the meat and you eat it. Okay, how much nikur we do today? As I said, is we don't do too much nikur today. For a few pieces, we actually do nikur. But let's say tzadik radin you have over here, or the pieces that we do. Let's say this is that piece over there from after the 12th rib. and you have a piece with chaylev on top, and it's connected. It wasn't like you had two separate things, and then somebody wanted to make it look nice, and they put the chaylev on top. You said with the karbonis, I'll say the raveda, put the chalavim on top. Anyway, over here, no, this is the original piece. So this is called the Isser Dovuk because it's attached. The two things are attached to each other. So the shaila is, when we're being Mashayir, this piece fell into something else, such as a pot, which we see right in front of us. So do you have to be Mavatul only the Chaylev? Or do you have to be Mavatul the whole piece? Why in the world would you have to be Mavatul the whole piece? The rest of the piece is kosher. Do we have a chumrah of a Isser Dovuk? So we're going to soon, we'll see what the din is, we'll soon see explanation behind them, but there is a chumrah of being machmir, to be mashayir against the whole piece, because it's a Isser Dovuk. Say it's Nasa Nevil. Okay, so here we have the piece fell inside, goodbye, it's sunk, it's cooking, and now the shaila is, how much do we need in order to be mabad? So the Shulchan Aruch says, why should you have to be mabadal against the meat? The meat is kosher. It's dovuk, so who cares dovuk? We don't care who your neighbors are. Ain't this a dovuk? No such thing. So as long as you have shishim, even though you might want to say, okay, the rest of the pot, okay, I get it, that it should be mutter, because why is that piece of meat shuldik? It's responsible just because it's attached to a piece of chaylev. Should answer the entire pot. Well, why do that? Okay, so that like tzach. But now you want to allow that piece too. Okay, so it got cooked in a pot. So the shaila is that chaylev is distributed equally throughout the whole pot, even not to say that there's more that went into the chaticha. That's what Machaber paskins. You don't even have to worry about the chaticha. The chaticha is mitzdaref with the rest of the pot to be mavatul the chaylev b'shishim, and you don't even, you just you take out the piece, cut off the chaylev. What kind of knife you're going to use is going to be an interesting exercise, and what you're going to have to do with the piece that was touching. But in any case, you can even eat the piece itself according to the Shulchan Aruch. But Ramah says no, yesh is a do. And therefore you need light, the lachin tzarich shishim b'chatich lavada connected the Isra Dovuk. Okay, you're going to need shishim in the meat against the chaylev. Bin ein b'chatich shishim, and you don't have shishim in that little piece of meat. Obviously, you didn't in the one that we have in the picture. So shishim b'sir connected kol chatich. So then you're going to need shishim gets the whole chatich. In other words, we assume that since it's an Isra Dovuk, that once it got cooked, that the Isser, basically, we're treating it as if the Isser went primarily into the Chaticha. If you want to conceptually imagine this, it's al derech when we had the Chaticha Chutz L'Reitiv. The fact that it was Chutz L'Reitiv meant that it was more absorbed into that Chaticha than it was into everything else. Or you can look at it, the Shitas Rashi, if it was partially in the Reitiv, we have two ways we can look at it. So too over here, the way that Ramah looks at it, that the primary absorption of the tam chaylev is going to go into the piece that it's attached to, the mamash attached together. And therefore you need shishim in that piece of meat to be mavatul the chaylev. And if you don't have it, so then we assume that it became aser. And since he holds Ramah, tichanas and nevel b'shari surim, so over here, if it's an Isser Dovuk, you're going to have to be mashayir against kol ha'chaticha. That's the chumrah of the Isser Dovuk. The shaila is, what is the reason for this chumrah of the Isser Dovuk? So there are two different timing that are brought by the Shach and Taz, and there's a nafkamina between each reason. So, okay, on the right we'll do the Taz. The Taz says it's like a gezerah. Maybe at some point it came out of the reitiv, and at that point it was on its own. Just like we knew in the case of the chaticha chutz l'reitiv, like we brought previously in Sif base last week. So then whatever outside the reitiv, you're on your own. So it got heated up in the pot, and then it came out chutz l'reitiv. Now it's chutz l'reitiv. So then it's on its own again. You can't be mitzvah if the rest of the kedera. It's on its own. This piece is absorbing the chaylev on its own. You can imagine a case, for example, somebody's cooking up a pot, and they're cooking. They didn't watch it, and some of the liquid boiled out, and now some of it is above the surface. You have that sometimes acholent cooks out, and you have the pieces which are chutz l'reitiv. So imagine over here it was chutz l'reitiv. So Satah says that we're concerned that that might happen, and if it happens, certainly you're going to need shishim in the meat to be mavatal the chaylev. So therefore, we have to answer the whole piece. That's the reasoning of the Tas. The Shach comes along and says it's a psagash mystic thing. That since it's attached, the two are attached to each other, so that piece of meat is going to absorb faster than the rest of the pot's going to absorb. They're attached to each other. So therefore, we're going to answer the entire chaticha. And that's the reason. So the Taz says the Ramah is machmer that the Machaber is not worried about either one. But according to the Ramah, who's yet worried? Why is he worried? So the Taz says it's mishum gzeira. We're worried that maybe it'll come out. So therefore, we answer the piece all the time. The Shach says even if it didn't come out, even if it's still within the reitiv, nevertheless, it's going to absorb more quickly. It's going to absorb more quickly than the rest of the pot. Okay, so l'may nafkamina with these two reasons. So one nafkamina is discussed. According to the Taz, it's only a chashash. If you want to call it a suffix, it's easier to understand. It's not mamish a suffix, but I'll derech in you from a suffix. So then there's reason to say that we should differentiate between whether we're dealing with an issa d'oraisa or an issa d'rabbanan. If it's an issa d'oraisa, then it makes more sense to be gazer. But avul b'issa d'rabbanan din chaticha din akadeda. So then we don't have such reason to be gazer according to the Taz. You're worried maybe it'll come out of the pot and be on its own outside the reitiv. Okay, well maybe it won't. So it's an issa d'rabbanan. Who says we have to be chayshish for such a thing? Okay, but according to the Shach doesn't look at the mitam gezeira. He says that since it's an issa dabuk, so therefore it's going to absorb more. So who cares what it's an issa d'rabbanan? It's all the same thing according to the Shach. So the fact that an issa d'rabbanan would be a kula according to the Taz would not be a kula according to the Shach. On the other hand, according to the Shach, who looks at the teva, that the nature of the issa dabuk is that it's going to be absorbed more thoroughly, more quickly into the chaticha. So hachshash rak b'makom shadivuk hanativi. When it's a natural attachment, like over here, aval chibur malchusi, but if it was artificially attached or later on attached, ein ma'aver tam b'mir. So it's not going to make the taste go so fast, even though it's attached. He brings an example over here. I don't think the picture is very accurate over here, so I'll say it before showing you the picture. Sometimes there's worms in fish. How do worms get into fish? So you can get a worm into the fish that it came from within the flesh itself, and then it's kosher. You're going to have a fish that it swallowed the worm. How did it swallow the worm? It's swimming in whatever body of water it's swimming in. It's got to eat, and it swallows a worm. You catch the fish, you clean the fish, you open up the fish. Vihine. Well, let's say you cook first the fish, even better. You cook first the fish, then you open up the fish and you find the worm. So if you find the worm in the flesh, so in general we say that's kosher. But if you find the worm in the digestive tract, okay, you open up the digestive tract and you find a worm stuck there to the flesh. So it's attached to the flesh of the inside of the fish. And that worm that came from the water, and that worm is asr. That's clearly asr. So then you're going to say it's isser dabuk. Or is it not an isser dabuk? Or we're going to say nas and avela, and you need shishim. Let's say you cooked it in a pot. Do you need shishim against the worm, or do you need shishim against the whole fish? Because it's isser dabuk. So according to the Shach, the fact when things are merely touching, I mean, in the pot, things are touching each other also. Isser dabuk doesn't mean it's just touching. Dabuk means it's attached. So what's pshat attached? So over here, the worm was stuck to the inside, but it's not like a iser dovuk. It's not a divuk TV, like the fat together with the piece of meat. So then, in such a case, when you talk about the worm inside the fish, lamashal, so the shach is going to say we don't call that iser dovuk. According to the Taz, that we're worried that maybe it's going to come outside the reitev. So the same thing applies to this worm. You're not going to be able to be mitzdarif the rest of the pot. You're going to need shishim in the fish against the worm which is inside the fish, if you have that gezeidah. So here it's going to be farkert. If it's an issa the rabbanim, the Taz is going to be lenient because we're not going to be gezer and the shach is going to be machmir. In this case, that we have an artificial, quote unquote, a not natural attachment between the Isser and the Heter, so the Shach will have more reason to be Mekel, and the Taz is still going to be Machmer. Here's the picture of the fish. So this is the way they got the worm into the fish, is the fisherman put a worm on a hook, and then it swallowed it. So I don't think that's a great example, because then when you catch the fish, I mean, then you take the hook out. So I don't think you're going to be too likely to cook the worm together with it in such a case. But whatever the case is, so then it's attached not in a solid way, so that's a nafkamina between the shach and the tas. It reminds us of some peites. You always use the opportunity for chazara about we have the reasoning why you have to wait 6 hours after eating meat. So we have the reason the shach and the reason the tas, and each one had a kul and a chumrah. Whether you chew the food and you spit it out, or you swallow something which doesn't have any mamashes. And each one has a kul and a chumrah. And so what do we do over there? We're machmer like both opinions. We got a close up in case you know what the one looks like. Okay, and what are the lalacha yishlach? So we're also machmer like both sheetas. But the air over here, interesting din brought down. Let's say you have both milas. Let's say you have both the reasoning of the tas, that it's an issa derabban, and that it's not mamash dovuk. So then rak be'issa derabban shadibuk and a tivi yeshlak. So then we're going to be machmer like both opinions. But if we don't have either reason to be machmer, so then you can talk about makel. Then talk, you have no problem.
Is the reason for the shach? The reason for the shachs saying it's fine where it's more strict because it's the davuk. Is it because it's physical issue of consideration? Because it's
but pashtus, it's physical, because if it's just touching, then there's no difference between this and the rest of the kedera. Not much of a difference. Saying things are touching, so they're touching. So this is touching and it got stuck. But
so it doesn't have a
chance. The shach is really concerned when the thing is created that way. And created that way, and they have a solid kind. Let's say you should, for example, they did nikur and they cut off this piece of chaylev and then they stuck it back on top. So it wouldn't absorb in the same way.
So we're saying so he holds that because it's attached, it doesn't have a chance to be part of the 60. It has a separate kind of consideration because it's not part of the 60. It's more closer attached to the isser, and therefore, I guess
exactly. The meat is going to absorb more because the isser is dovuk to it.
So it can't be, but it can't be attached with the other 60. It's separate.
You can't treat it like the rest of the kedera and be mitzdaref to the rest in such a case if it's a isser dovuk. So the Mechaber disagrees with the whole thing, and he's not worried about it. But at the Ramah, there are two explanations for this chumrah of the Ramah. Good? Okay, next case. And now we get to do a little bit of chazara. So it'll help out the chazara we did at the beginning of the class. What happens if you have a chaticha chutz l'reitev? Okay, so let's learn some Ramah inside over here first. So repeat this. This is Sif Dalet. Won't hurt to repeat it. Le'yom rechaticha atzmanas nevela el b'bas b'chal v'lo b'shari surim n'mchaber paskin l'gerbin afrayt. Again, because I chaylev niv b'chaticha v'em b'shishim levat le'b'nes ravachagav bishlam b'chayres ain't sarach el shishim k'neged chazas chaylev. Because I feel a chaticha atzma chazaras le'yitzim, and then the chaticha, if you don't recognize it, the way the shach explained, so then you're going to be able to eat the entire thing. And that's the psak of the mechaber who paskins. This whole thing doesn't apply b'shari surim b'yishem damrim b'chali surim ch'tich nas and avela beginning in a kosh ben l'shabbos. That we learned already before, and that's the Ramah paskening like Rabbeinu Tam. And the Ramah adds, this is the part we just learned. Daf kima iser dovu b'keteichas. Okay. When is this going to apply? It's a sinister dovu. Oy shachatecha kula chutz l'reit. B'nafal leha iser. Or it was chutz l'reitev. And then we're going to see Nasa Nevelam. Okay. But if we have, for example, the shari, even if it's Bosor, even if it's Chalav that fell into the pot and it was submerged, there's no Nasa Nevela over here. What's going to be Nasa Nevela? The whole milk becomes spashet in the whole kedera. If it was only totally submerged, so what kind of Nasa Nevela over here? We're talking about Nasa Nevela is that it fell on a piece. Okay, so if it fell into the soup, what kind of Nasa Nevela? It would be Nasa Nevela, talking about lach balach, if this whole pot of soup fell into something else. But if you're talking about a chaticha Nasa Nevela, what kind of chaticha are we talking about over here? So it's obviously not a chaticha, which is totally submerged in the liquid, because then we're masham b'shishim against the whole thing. Okay, what is it talking about? So it's either talking about an Isser Davuk, says the Ramah, or that it's Kula Chutz L'Reitiv. Now the Shaila is now, what about the Chaticha, which is half in the Reitiv and half not in the Reitiv? So don't read ahead. Let's go back to the worm so you don't get distracted. Get more distracted with the worm than you are anyway. How do we do this? Stop share. Okay. So let's just talk it through again. I know I reviewed at the beginning of the shir, but let's get clear. What does the Ramah hold? Everybody holds that if it's kula chutz l'reitev, what's the din? What do you need to be mavatal? You have a tipas chalav fell into a kedera shel Bosor. If it was kula chutz l'reitev, what's the din?
Shar in the chaticha.
The chaticha, you need shishim in the chaticha against the tipas chalav. Get it. And if it would be shari surim, what does the Ramah hold? Let's say it was a tipas dam fell onto the chatichas Bosor. What's the din? According to the Machaber, there's no Nasa Nevel. Get it. If the whole thing falls in later on to the pot, you mishayir against the tipas dam. And according to Ramah, who's machmer, and we say chetich Nasa Nevel b'shari surim, so you're going to need shishim in what? If it's kulei chutz l'kadeir, chutz l'reiti. Shishim in the
whole piece.
Whole piece. The piece has to have shishim against it. And if all the pieces were submerged in the reitev, then you need shishim in the most makel case. The whole thing's under the surface. So what can you use to be mabatal the dam? The whole kedera. Good. Now, if it's partially in the kedera, partially out of the kedera, what is the Ramah? That we said is machlekes teri. Says you can use the whole pot. We treat it like it's teicha reitev, and the Rashi held it's like it's chutz l'reitev. And what are the Ramah paskin? How do you be mavatal the tipa?
You can use the whole kedera, but
you can use the whole kedera. Good. And what's with the piece?
Surah.
The piece is asur. Why is the piece asur? So we have a machlekes shachantas. For the reasoning why the Ramah holds, is it because he's mesupik, like the Shach says? He's mesupik, whether a passing like Rashi or the Ri, or the Taz says that the passing's really like the Ri, but has an extra chumrah. He adds a chumrah for this piece. So now the Ramah says we're machmeh b'shari surim when if it's an Isser Davuk, we're machmeh b'shari surim. Okay, for the two reasons we just gave. Okay, and also if it's chutz l'reitev. Now, what would you expect the Ramah to say now with shari surim? What would be the din if it's partially in the reitev, partially out of the reitev? What's going to be the din? We should say you mevatel the tipas dam, for example, with what? What do we say before?
Whole Kedera.
Okay. And what's going to be with the piece?
Oh, sir.
Piece should be also. Okay. So now we see the Ramah pulls a fast one. So Ramah says, "V'davki ma'aser davik b'chatichas heter." That's the case. We're going to say Chetich Nas in the Veda B'Shari Surah. But if it's partially in the Reitev, and there's no Iser Dovik, Layamrin and Chetich Nas in the Vela, Umitztaref Kol HaKadeira Lavat Leis. And you can use the whole Kedera. You should still answer that Chaticha because of B'Shari Surah and Bosor B'Chalav B'Shein Eser Dovik mix the Chaticha Chaticha Reitev Amrin Chaticha Nasim. Okay, so that's in Shari Surah Bosor B'Chalav, even though it's not a Eser Dovik and it's partially to the part that then it's Nasim Avei. So over here, that piece we're not going to eat, but we're not going to say Nasim Avei on that piece. The piece that's a little bit inside the Reitev. So the way we learned by Bosor B'Chalav is that he was being machmer to treat it like it's chutz l'reitev, and by that case, your machmer is chutz l'reitev. Not only it's aser, but it's also nasa nevela, because we're treating it like it's chutz l'reitev. Okay. Over here, the Ramah says, if it's kule chutz l'reitev, then it's nasa nevela even b'shari surah. But then, look what he says here. If it's partially inside the Reitev, you're going to ask it, but we're not going to say Nasa Nevela. Where did that come from? Read it again. When do we say Nasa Nevela B'Shari Surah? Dafki Misr Dovak B'Chaticha Seter Eisha Chaticha Kula Chutz L'Reitev B'Nafala Es. Either it's Isr Dovak or it's Kula Chutz L'Reitev. Avali mixes Chaticha Techa Reitev. Vein Isr Dovak B'I. You don't have Isr Dovak, and it's not outside, it's partially inside. We don't say Nasa Nevela, Umitzaref Kol HaGedera Levat L'Leser. But not Nasa Nevela. You answer it, you don't eat it, but if it falls into something else, you're not Meshayir against the whole thing. Meshayir is why. Okay, and Bosor B'Chalav, calls it B'Shari Surah, Bosor B'Chalav, Ava B'Shein Eser Dov, mixes Chetich, Amrin Nasa Nevela. So when it comes to Chaticha that's partially in the Reitev, partially out of the Reitev, in both cases the Ramah is going to ask for a piece. But if it's Bosor B'Chalav, he's going to say Nasa Nevela. And when it comes Shari Surah, he's not going to say Nasa Nevela. And the Shaila is why. And the answer is Pashut, similar to the case, not similar to the case, but similar to the formula. Just like before we had the case of Lach Balach. Yeah? And we said if it's Shari Surim Lach Balach, we put together the Rabbeinu Ephraim heter of Shari Surim, even the Ramah doesn't hold with it, but he puts it together over there with the Ravid who was Mekel Lach Balach. So to over here, he puts it together with Das Hari, that the Ri holds it's not Nasa Nevela, and you can even eat the piece. So even though the Ramah does not want to be so Mekel like the Ri to allow you to eat the piece, but since the Ri holds you can eat the piece, it's mamish mutter, so it'll be machman on the piece. But since it's Shari Surim, it's not going to be Nasa Nevela. So even though the Ramah doesn't paskin mamish like the Ri, and he answers the piece, and he doesn't paskin like Rabbeinu Ephraim either, because he says we can't minute pasha to answer b'Shari Surim. But since he doesn't completely erase das Rabbeinu Ephraim, so since safe, the Rabbeinu Ephraim holds that there's no Nasa Nevela b'Shari Surim, so he's not going to make that piece be Nasa Nevela. He puts together das Hari, that the piece b'chlal should be mutter. And to be consistent, just like we had the question the Shachan Tazi asked before, over there in Siv Base, if the Ramah is passing like the Ri, and he's allowing you, when it's half in the rate of half not, and he's going to allow you to use the whole Kedera to be Mavatos, why is he answering the piece? And we had the two explanations, Shachan Tazi. Okay? But if you want to be consistent with the you'd matter a piece too. So he'll take that. He doesn't want to go so far by itself, but he put that together with Ben Ephraim and holds B'chal not B'chal if there's no nas in the veil. So therefore, he puts them together, and therefore he'll say it's not nas in the veil. So the piece he's not going to allow you to eat, but to say it's nas in the veil, he'll be mitzvah if das Ben Ephraim to das Ari, and he'll say that it's not nas in the veil.
How does it answer the stira? He still says that by Bosor B'chalav the chaticha nas is nevela before he said that it's not.
Again,
how does it answer the stira? Earlier we said
what's stira?
The stira that the Ramah says over here that by Bosor B'chalav we say that the piece is chaticha nasas nevela, whereas before we said that you can use the whole kedera to be mevatel the tipas chalav, but we're machmer that you can't eat the chaticha, but we don't say that the chaticha was chanan.
By Bosor B'chalav we do say chanan.
We said that before. I thought we said
it's a base. It's also it's nasa nevela.
But the Ramah said you can use the whole kedera to be mevatel the tipas chalav, not the chaticha.
Yeah, but if that piece falls into something else, it's going to answer like the whole piece, not going against like Eser Belua.
I thought we said you could use the.
He answers the piece to the extent that it's nasa nevela.
But for bittul, you can use the whole kedera to be mevatel shishim against the tipas chalav. Not you don't need to be mevatel against the whole chaticha.
But the shaila is once you answer the chaticha, you're treating this chaticha like it's chutz l'reitiv. So it's nasa nevela. Okay, so you're treating it like it's chutz l'reitiv. Okay, so if it's shari surim, it's not. If that's a Rabbi Ephraim, we'll say it's not nasa nevela. But over there in Siv base, it's clear it's nasa nevela. That's what he says right over here. Calls it b'shari surim. Even though it's still partially techaretiv. And therefore, if that piece falls in, we're not just going to be mashayar against the chalav that fell into it. We're going to treat it like a nasa nevela. Whereas over here, if a chalav or dam fell into it, it will only be mashayar against the dam or the chalav. So the piece you can't eat, but it's not going to be nasa nevela to be mashayar against the entire piece over there. Why? Because remember, it's not if that's Rabbi Ephraim. It's a balancing act that Ramah is doing over here. So when he's mitzaref, when he's not mitzaref, you see, even the Shach and Taz are grappling with Siv base. Okay, so like they found a way to explain that. Then it comes down over here, and then it says Shari Surim. So now you mix the Rabbi Ephraim into the mix, and it changes the whole din. Okay, the rest of this, the shears, it's a little bit complicated, but let's get to it. Okay, we have to go back to this Gemara for a second for the Yom Trei Mashu. And we keep coming back to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that Mimba Minoli Bottle, the Isra Mashu, and even though we don't paskin like him, we keep referring back to him because there are other cases that we want to compare to. So in our world, we, as I mentioned before, we do have certain cases where there's Isra Mashu, the Shleish Matirin. This is Mashu, and the big case for us is Chametz B'Pesach. Chametz B'Pesach is Isra Mashu. So we're going to see over here what's the din of how far do you go with a mashahu. When you have a mashahu, then you take a mashahu from the mashahu, then you take a mashahu from the mashahu, mashahu from the mashahu, from the mashahu. How far ad moseh? How far can you keep going? Yeah. So let's go back, just review. That's Rabbeinu Tam. To go back, just to review this, that the Rab said, Kivin Shnos Tam, then it's called Shehem Mina. So you ask him because it's Shehem Mina. What do you mean Shehem Mina? So it's also the one line doesn't make sense to the other line. First of all, since it's Min B'Mina, you shouldn't need to be nice and tam. You should just say, who needs this whole line? So Rabbi Bar Chana was mater chatichas. right? When it fell in, he was not only matter the rativ and the kippah, okay, but so Rav just should have said it's min b'minei lay bottle and asher chatichas. But that's not what he said. He put in another line, and he said since it's nice and tam, then it's chaticha nas and navel. So what was the explanation? So he said to the Rabbi, just read it again inside. So even though taka min b'minei also b'cholshu, so all the other pieces taka also, but that doesn't mean they're nas and navel. So it's only Isser Koshu, he says that it's not going to be Nas and Avela. So you're not going to be able to eat all the other pieces, but all the other pieces are not going to be Nas and Avela. Okay, when is it going to be Nas and Avela? When it was Nes and Tam, when there was no bittul. So the Shaila then becomes okay, so let's say you have a bunch of pieces. And there's the Issa Mashu, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so all the pieces are now Asr. The Shaila is when those pieces fall into something else, do we have to be Mashar against the whole piece? Or do we treat it like Issa Mashu? In other words, we say you have piece number one. Piece number one was an Avela, and pieces 2 through 10 were kosher. Okay, so it fell in over there, and we say, or let's say there were 100 pieces. There's 100 pieces over there, and one piece in Avela fell in. It's Isser Mashahu, Mimba Mino Leibotel. So now we got 101 pieces of Isser. Okay, now what happens if one of those pieces falls into another pot? So if we would say all the pieces would be Nas and Avela, let's say there wouldn't be 100 pieces. Let's say there would be 59 pieces. Whatever the case is, they're not Yovish B'Yovish. They will cook together. So they will cook together, and there was no B'Dil B'Shishim. So then that's what he says, Kivish Nosan Tam, then it's Chatich Nas and Avela. So then it would be Nas and Avela, and the Rabbeinu Tam holds that we have Chatich Nas and Avela B'Shari Surim. So then, if one of those 59 pieces fell into another pot, you're going to have to be Mashar against the whole piece. But if it's only Issa Mashu, and Issa Mashu falls into something else, so we're going to say a Mashu of that too. How far are we going to keep doing this? So here's the case. See, you have a piece in the Vela fell into a pot of Ksheis. Fine. Yeshishim Keneged Bosor Atreif. Let's say there's Shishim. So we'll pass in that it's going to be Mutter Aval Das Rabbi Yehuda Hakol because min b'minim and a bottle feel a bottle. So it's also b'mashu. So now we got this big pot here. Now one of those pieces flew over into another pot, got flying pieces of meat. So it flew over in the other pot. So now what's the shaila? So when it fell into the first pot, we had one mashu, but now we're going to say trei mashu. Oh, we answer the second part also. So Rabbeinu Tam says, "A Bosor nafal masira rishon l'sira sheina eino so mashu." That's the whole yesod. That's the way the Rabbeinu Tam learns the Gemara. But we say mibminolei bottle, and we don't care about the tam, just to answer the thing itself. But you want nas and avela? No, it's going to answer. That doesn't mean it's going to be nas and avela. So therefore, it's going to be, we don't have a problem nas and avela. You don't have to be mashar against the whole piece. It only became master because there's a mashu. There's a mashu. So whatever it absorbed, if it was 1 out of 60, so you have to absorb. You treat it. It was 1/60th isser. You go according to the proportion, according to the tam, whatever it was that got absorbed. That's what Rabbeinu Tam says. Now the shaila is what's with chametz. So now we get down to real life over here. Let's say you have Isser Mashu. So we got a roll over here, which is chametz gomer. It doesn't look like it's exactly a bottle b'shishim, but let's pretend it's a bigger pot and it's a smaller roll, and it fell into a Pesach pot on Pesach. If it fell in before Pesach, it's a whole discussion. Is it Yovish Volovish, Yovish Volach? anyway, the whole not discussion. This is on Pesach. We say it's Isser Mashu. So this chametz fell into a Pesach dekapat in the middle of Pesach, and it's also b'mashu. So now this whole pot is awesome. Okay. You had shishim. It doesn't matter. You have shishim. Chametz is also Pesach b'mashu. So now, what do you think happens next? Shishim connected to chametz. Abu chametz also b'mashu. Okay. So the whole pot's awesome. Now, the meat still knows how to fly. Now the meat flew over into another piece of the pot. So what do you think? Based on what we learned until now, what do you think the din should be? Rabbi Yehuda. Your Rabbi Yehuda suddenly sounds very relevant now. Yeah, okay, Rabbi Yehuda asks b'mashu. We're interested in shishim. Yeah, but now comes Pesach. So what would the Rabbeinu Tam say about this? What do you think? You're all thinking? The silence because you're thinking? Let's go back. Let's go back. What in the case before, what did we say? Let's go back here. What do we say over here?
It's not Nasan available.
Over here, we say it's also Mashahu. Then the piece fell into over here. And we say that in order for it to be Nasan Avela, that you have to be Mashayir against the whole thing, you need to be Nasan Tam. That's Rabbeinu Tam. So therefore, is it going to Asr B'Mashahu the next part? No, that's what we said over there. That's what Rabbeinu Tam would say. So what's going to be over here? If it would be the same thing. So here, this is Isser Mashahu. Now some of this fell into here. So that became Asr because the whole thing became Asr B'Mashahu. Okay, but now is this going to become Asr or not? If it would be the same like the other case, what would we say? We'd say there's no Isser Mashu. Just like over there, it's Isser Mashu. It's not Nasan Avela. Why in the world should we have to be Mashayir against the whole thing? This is the same din. Same din. Let me explain something. Let's talk about the gashmias of this for a second. Let's say you had a crumb. Let's say you had a crumb. You had a big pot of soup. You had a vat of soup in a factory. Yeah, you got the 20,000 liter vat of soup, basic soup, and a crumb falls in. Crumb falls in. You got a vat the size of your house. One side of the vat, the crumb falls in, the whole thing's hot. What's the din? If it was on Pesach, the whole thing's aser, chametz aser b'mashu. Let's say you quickly take out a little bit of soup from the other side of that. Okay, so there's no chance that little mashahu is in your spoon. Okay, what's with that spoon? So kosher or not? Chametz or matzah? What's the din? You allowed to drink that soup?
No.
There's any tam chametz in that soup? No tam chametz in the soup. Why can't you eat the soup? Because chametz has a base of mashu. Nothing to do with tam. There's no tam. There's no mamashus. There's no tam. Now you take that spoon and you throw it into another vat, or it fell into another vat. What's with the second vat? Or the second pot? That spoon is also asur b'mashu, or not? So we learned from the case of Rabbeinu Tam, from Rabbeinu Tam's explanation. That's exactly what Rabbeinu Tam saying in the Gemara. I'll answer it, but I'm not going to make it mamish asur that it's going to answer something else to it as nasan avela. So therefore, I'm going to eat shishim. You have shishim, good, but it's not become Isser Mashu. That's what we learned in the case of nevela and dag tamei from the Gemara with Rav, and that's the way Rabbeinu Tam explained it. So along comes the Taz, and it's the same thing comes Pesach.
Why would you need shishim?
Why do you need shishim is a good question. Pashtus is because it's usr. Since it has a shem isser on it, you need shishim. Then for shishim you'd also need nas and avela, right?
And b'chal, it's not nice in any time.
It's not nice to time I need shishim. Yes, a good question. I'm not sure. Okay, have to look into it. Okay, so the Taz says the mashu below this is the mashu. That's what the Taz says. However, the Shach disagrees. The Shach, by the way, it's not in the Shach, it's in the Nekudas HaKesef. And it's a long, involved, intricate, wide-ranging Nekudas HaKesef. Discusses all different sorts of inyanim. So I think we discussed in the introduction that the Taz and the Shach lived in the same time. Taz was a lot older, but they were machabed each other, they met. But in the writing was a very big sharfkeit. So then the Shach wrote Nekudas HaKesef is a pirush on the Taz when he disagrees with the Taz, sometimes very sharply. And later on, you look in the back of the Yeridayas and you have a case where the Taz answers some of the things that are Shach, and then the Shach answers the Taz's answer on the Nekudas HaKesef. But over here, what did the Shach say in Nekudas HaKesef? He says, no, chametz is different. It's also going to ask about mashu. So therefore, when this mashu chametz fell in, you have shishim, but it doesn't matter. It's also about mashu. And when this fell into the other one, according to the Shach, Bosor masir rishon shabala mashu chametz eiser asashir sheni b'mashu. So according to the Taz, we don't say trei mashu. According to the Gemara, we don't say Terei Mashu in that case. The Shaila is with the Chametz, we say Terei Mashu. So according to the Taz, we don't. So the first one will be also Mashu, but the second one not Mashu. But according to the Shach, we do say Terei Mashu. And this is always going to be also Mashu. And why? What's the difference in the two cases? So the Shach explains, and the main point is that Chametz is different from the Chumrah of Rabbi Yehuda. Not just because that's Rabbi Yehuda and this is everybody holds mashu. The difference is it's a special din of min b'minei. The inyan of chametz asering b'mashu, not the word min b'minei, because chametz is also b'mashu even min she'eina minei. Rabbi Yehuda who answers two things min b'minei b'mashu. If it's min b'she'eina minei, then it's batal b'shishim. Okay, but chametz mashu is a whole different story. Chametz is also b'mashu even the she'eina minei. So how can you learn from that case to our case, says the Shach? Then for chametz b'mashu, whole discussion in the Rishonim, what is the reason why it is the chametz b'mashu? Many timim that are given. Some say it's davar sheish matirin because they have to pay so chametz becomes mutter. All different sorts of reasons given why it's chametz is also b'mashu. Whatever the case is, it's not the same reason as we have over there in the Gemara. And since it's a different case, we have a different reason to asar chametz. Therefore, this Ramasha who will go from the first part, will go into the second part too, and you cannot learn from that din. Is Lashon Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe brings us down Hilchos Pesach, obviously, and the Alter Rebbe passing like the Shach. There's a Lashon. I forget exactly what the Lashon is. The Alter Rebbe brings such a Lashon that you can have a mashu of a mashu also. So it's a Isra mashu. So a mashu from a mashu is also a mashu. And a mashu from a mashu is also a mashu. Each thing's a mashu. So it's a smaller mashu, but it's still a mashu. And since chametz is also a mashu, you cannot extrapolate from that case that we know is mutter. And this case, therefore, becomes asr. Yeah. Yeah, there's a Prima Godin, I mentioned, it's interesting, Svara. He's trying to be Mazmar of Taz. So he says that the Tam Mashahu that gets absorbed in the Chaticha will not leave that chaticha. A mashal won't leave a chaticha. In other words, a mashal can only go so far. The mashal, he did his job. He went and he asked the chaticha. Gendik knows. He asks all the chatichas over there. But to go into something else, from that chaticha into another one, that doesn't have the case to do. Okay? So Prima Godim brings such a svar. Part of the discussion here, I'm just going to mention it, just so you should have the musag. But when we say min b'mine and min she'ena mine, we've been taking over here as a davar aposhut that what makes something min b'mine min she'ena mine is whether it has the same taste or not. That we've been taking as like an article of faith, so to speak. Well, the fact is, when you get to Hilchos Taruvas, you see that this is a very big machlekes. There are those that say it goes after the taste, and there are those that say it goes after the name. Bosor Shmo. Oh, long discussion about Chabastas, different rayas. Where does this come from? Where do you see the name is important? You have the thing change names, and what's the difference if it has a different name? What that makes it a different category of thing? Just has a different name. So we have over here also when it comes chametz in the anyway, the Alter Rebbe discusses it over here. It's not part of the chumrah of chametz, and that's why we have even that chametz is more strict than basa b'chalav in certain ways. That's the big chiddush. I mentioned it without explaining it really. The big kula the Alter Rebbe has in Hilchos Pesach, he mentions a big kula when it comes to basa b'chalav, and it's based on this concept here that chametz, even though basa b'chalav were things that were previously a heter and then it became a iser, because basar by itself is mutter, chalav by itself is mutter, and then it became a iser. It bears a certain resemblance to chametz, because chametz before Pesach it's mutter, and when it comes Pesach it's aser. But there's a very significant difference the Alter Rebbe points out. Chametz kept the same name. So chametz was chametz before, and it was chametz after. It was chametz when you made hamantashen on Purim, and it's a chametz if it was on Pesach. The same chametz. So it doesn't need to change its name. The time comes along, and now it was mutter, now became mutter. Basa b'chalav, in addition to it combining, it also has to change name. Because this was basar, and this was chalav, and now it's a new metzias of basa b'chalav. Okay, and that's why the Alter Rebbe has certain kulas that we'll see that even by chametz and other isurim, that it'll remain aser. Where when it comes basa b'chalav to aser it, it's not going to have the same thing. We see it lagabe not barnat, lagabe different. We'll see it later on. We'll get to when we speak in Tzadik Dalet and Tzadik Hey. Okay, I'm going to stop over here. So just to briefly review, thought it might be useful just look at just a list of topics. Of course, you have it all. You should chazer over the Chaveres. Talked about the machlekes, about the Hanan B'Shar Isurim, and different taterim that are sometimes machmer lach balach, and then you have some meruba. And we brought down in some cases we'll have seen it's midrabanan lach balach, or whether it's cold according to the marshal, that we don't really take upon ourselves that kula. And then I brought down another heter when the piece was half narrative, half not narrative. Well, in that case, also you won't say nas nevela. And we talked about the Inyan Esher Dabak, Tere Mashahu, talked about the in Yonim Derabanim, Kavush, and Malicha. And that's basically it for today. Questions? Okay, Mirz Hashem, we'll continue next week with Tzadik Dalet. But as I mentioned at the beginning, this is very, very Yesodistic in Yonim, very important to Chazer. And the rest of us, B'chalav and Taruvas and many other in Yonim Yesodim B'Yeser. Okay. Fine. Okay, we'll call it an evening. Sei gesund, Chevra.
That's a koyach.
Gute Nacht.